Welcome to No Name, the place where America's darkest highways, forgotten towns, and unexplained encounters are given a voice. Every story you hear on this channel comes from those who lived it. Truckers, hikers, travelers, and locals who stumbled into moments that still haunt them today. Tonight's account is one of those stories. A late-night stop in Ash Fork, a silent gas station that shouldn't have existed, and a visitor no one has ever been able to explain. Before we begin, remember, your experiences keep this channel alive. So after listening, tell us, have you ever seen something on the road that didn't feel human? Share your story in the comments and subscribe if you want more true encounters from the shadows of the United States. Now, let's step into the dark. I've learned something about the American night. Out there on the long, empty highways where the desert meets the asphalt and the wind drags its nails across your windows. The dark doesn't just surround you, it studies you. And sometimes, if you listen long enough, it warns you. Or maybe that's just what I tell myself now, after everything that happened in Ash Fork. My name is Caleb Mercer. I'm 43 years old, and I've been driving long-haul freight for nearly half my life. I'm not a man who scares easy. Not because I'm brave, but because truckers like me learn early on that fear doesn't keep you alive. Awareness does. You trust your instincts, and you don't ignore the feeling that tells you something is off, even if you can't explain it. But back in June of 2021, I ignored mine. I still wish I hadn't. That week had already been brutal. Arizona heat that made the steering wheel feel like a cast iron skillet, a delivery schedule that tightened each time I so much as slowed down, and a loneliness that felt heavier the longer the road stretched on. I'd slept maybe 3 hours in the previous day and a half. I remember rubbing the heel of my hand against my eyes so hard that my vision pulsed. By the time midnight curved around the horizon and swallowed the last of the light, I was barely holding myself together. I told myself I'd stop for fuel at the next open station. Just a quick top-off, maybe a cold drink, and 10 minutes to breathe. I wasn't even hungry, but something inside me whispered that I needed to get off the road, like I was drifting toward a place I shouldn't go. That's when I saw the glow. Faint, amber-colored, way out in the nothingness. A low-lit sign flickering over a lonely gas station that didn't appear on my GPS. No cars in the lot, no movement. Just a rectangle of pale light standing against the black desert. Ash Fork Service and Supply. I'd been through Ash Fork dozens of times, and I'd never seen this place before. I should have kept driving. God, I should have. But exhaustion makes you rationalize the strange. You must have missed it before. Maybe it's new. Anything is better than nothing. As I eased off the highway, gravel cracked under my tires like bones. The place looked abandoned except for the lights humming under a flat tin awning. A single fuel pump, glass doors reflecting the night, a neon open sign buzzing faintly like it was struggling to stay alive. The moment I stepped out of the cab, I felt it, the temperature shift. A coolness too sharp for the desert summer, as if I'd walked into the breath of something old and waiting. My skin prickled, my thoughts sharpened. Suddenly, I was wide awake. I scanned the lot. No vehicles, no clerk visible through the windows, no ringing of the door buzzer. Just the sound of the wind pushing dust against the station walls. I told myself the attendant was probably in the back room. People take breaks. People step away. People get tired too. And yet, the quiet, it wasn't the kind that comes from stillness. It was the quiet that comes from being observed. Like sound had been pushed aside so something else could listen more closely. I swiped my card at the pump. Declined. I tried again. Declined. I tried a second card. Service unavailable. A thin tremor went through me. Machines don't get nervous, but I swear the pump felt like it was hesitating, like it didn't want to wake something. All right, I muttered. I'll pay inside. I stepped toward the door. That's when I heard it. A slow, deliberate knock. Not from the store. Not from the pump, but from somewhere behind me, 2 sharp taps against something hollow, a rhythm too intentional to be the wind. I froze. Another knock, softer this time, almost playful. I turned quickly, scanning the darkness behind the station. The area was swallowed by open desert, flat, empty, and lit only by the weak glow from the fluorescent bulbs above me. Nothing moved. Not the scrub, not the sand. I told myself it could have been the cooling metal of my truck. Heat does weird things to machinery. It expands, contracts, pops, clicks. I'd heard it 1,000 times, but that wasn't a pop, and it wasn't a click. It was knuckles. I swallowed hard, turned back, and pulled the door open. The bell above it chimed, but even that sounded off, muted, as if wrapped in cotton. The air inside smelled faintly of oil and something sweet, like rotting fruit hidden beneath chemical cleaner. The aisles were narrow and dim, shelves half-stocked with dusty cans and faded snack wrappers. The drink coolers hummed in the back, lights flickering inside them. "Hello?" I called out. "Anyone working tonight?" My voice felt swallowed by the room. I stepped farther in, boots creaking on the worn linoleum. The counter was empty, save for an old register and a cup filled with dull pens. Behind it, a half-open door led into a storage room, but no light spilled from within. "Hello?" I repeated, louder this time. Nothing. A soft echo. Not repeating my word. No. No. More like someone else whispering something back, too faint to understand. Too close to be imagination. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Maybe someone needed help. Maybe they'd fallen. Maybe they couldn't speak loudly. I've seen bad falls, strokes, diabetic episodes. Truckers come across all kinds of emergencies on the road. So I convinced myself that was what this was. Concern. That was the emotion that pulled me forward, deeper into the store, toward the backroom door. That story. That lie. The door moved, not swung, not opened, just shifted. A tiny, almost unnoticeable adjustment, as though something on the other side had pressed against it gently. Testing the gap, I stopped mid-step. The whispering sound came again. Closer now. A thread of breath slipping through the crack in the door. My pulse hammered. "Hey," I said, my voice tight, "if someone's back there, I just need to pay for fuel. I'm not trying to bother you." Silence. Then knock, knock. Right behind the door. And this time it wasn't playful. This time it sounded irritated. I backed up quickly, nearly knocking a display of stale chips to the floor. The air felt thicker now, heavy in my lungs. Like the store was shrinking around me. I turned to leave, instinct screaming through every nerve in my body. But as I reached the door, something stopped me. Not physically, emotionally. A single thought, cutting through my panic. What if someone really is in trouble? People disappear on these highways, people collapse and never get up again. And I knew, deep down, that if I walked out, if I drove away, that question, what if, would follow me for the rest of my life. So I forced myself to turn around. The storage room door was now open wider, maybe an inch, maybe 2, just enough for a sliver of darkness to spill out like ink. "Are you hurt?" I asked quietly. No answer, but the smell changed, just slightly. The sweetness grew stronger, heavier like fruit that had been left too long in a hot bin. It scraped at my senses and made my stomach twist. I took one step forward and the whispering started again. But this time, I recognized it. It wasn't a voice trying to speak to me. It was someone breathing, in and out, slow, ragged, as if struggling to stay conscious. My chest tightened. "Sir?" I whispered, barely able to force the word out. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" The breath hitched, paused, and then something moved in the darkness, small, soft, dragging against the floor. A hand, maybe. A foot. Something human. Or at least shaped like human. My vision blurred for a second, the room tilting, the hum of the freezers suddenly sounding like they were coming from far away. That's when I realized I was trembling, not from fear, but from the pressure of that silence pressing against me like a weight. I reached out and grabbed the door edge. The whispering stopped instantly. Everything stopped. The air, the smell, the stillness. And in that suffocating quiet, I heard something so faint I almost didn't believe it was real. A muffled voice. Not a breath. Not a whisper. A voice. It said one word. Run. The moment that single word reached me, everything inside my body reacted before my mind could. My fingers tightened on the doorframe. My breath hitched. My eyes widened, as if stretching them would somehow help me make sense of what I'd just heard. Run. It was soft, like someone forcing the word through a mouth that barely had the strength to form it. But there was desperation in it, a raw human fear that didn't belong to me, yet instantly became mine. For a second, I didn't move. My muscles locked themselves in a battle between instinct and disbelief. It didn't feel real. Nothing about that night had felt real. The empty station, the knocking, the shifts in temperature, and now a stranger's cracked voice bleeding out of the darkness, telling me to run from something I couldn't see. I swallowed hard and leaned just slightly forward, trying to peer into the gap. The smell of sweetness and rot thickened again, clinging to my throat. My eyes struggled to adjust to the darkness behind that door, and then I saw it. A hand, pale, thin, pressed weakly against the floor as if the person behind the door was lying on their stomach, too weak to lift themselves. 3 fingers twitched, not in a wave, not in a request for help, but in a trembling attempt to pull their hand back, away from me, away from the door. Every primitive instinct in my body screamed that something on the other side was wrong, not injured, not sick, wrong. I can help you, I stammered quietly, though my voice shook in a way that betrayed the lie. I didn't want to help. I wanted out. I wanted my truck. I wanted the open road. But guilt is a powerful thing, and some part of me needed to hear that I wasn't abandoning someone in danger. The fingers curled slightly, as if gripping invisible dirt, and the voice came again, hoarse, strained, terrified. Please, go. The final word dragged out like the last bit of breath in their lungs. Something scraped behind the door. Not from the figure lying there. No. Something else, a slow shift, a dragging of weight. Not footsteps, too heavy, too uneven, like something large adjusting its position in a cramped space. My heart slammed against my ribs. Whatever was behind that door, the person lying on the ground wasn't warning me for their sake. They were warning me for mine. I stepped back. Instinct ripped control from the part of my brain still trying to be rational. I could feel adrenaline surging through my body, turning my hands into clumsy, shaking things barely under my command. The door moved, not from the fallen person, but from something deeper inside. A shadow shifted, expanding, swallowing the thin strip of dim store light. That was enough. I turned and bolted. My boots hammered against the linoleum as the bell above the door gave a short, strangled chime when I threw it open. The cool desert air hit me like a slap and should have been a relief. It wasn't. I felt watched, hunted. Like every step I took toward my truck was already too slow. Halfway across the lot, I heard it. The unmistakable sound of something hitting the store's interior floor. Hard. A thud. Followed by another. And then a scraping, as if something long or uneven was dragging itself toward the front of the store. I didn't look back. I yanked open my driver's side door and climbed up fast, hands fumbling for the lock button. My fingers kept slipping from how sweaty they were. When I finally hit the lock, the click sounded pathetically thin, like a toy mechanism barely holding danger at bay. My breath came in ragged bursts. I shoved the key into the ignition and twisted. The engine groaned, failed. I tried again, harder this time. The starter spun, but the engine refused to catch. No, no, no! Come on! I yelled at the dashboard, slamming my fist against the steering wheel. My truck had never stalled on me, not once in 13 years. Yet here, in this dead place, it felt like even the machinery didn't want to wake up. I heard the store door open, a long, slow squeal of rusted hinges being forced wide. I didn't want to look, but terror makes you do stupid things. So I turned my head. The store's doorway was dark, completely dark. The lights inside flickered violently, then stabilized at a low, sickly glow. Something stood just past the threshold, tall enough that its head nearly grazed the top of the frame. Not moving, just watching. I couldn't make out its face, or if it had one. The silhouette was too still, too stretched, too wrong in proportion. My mind refused to accept the shape, as if it kept slipping out of comprehension every time I tried to focus on it. My hand twisted the key again, desperate, frantic. The engine sputtered, coughed. Started. I slammed the truck into gear and hit the gas so hard the tires squealed across the gravel. The truck lurched forward in a violent jolt, and the motion finally broke me free from staring at that dark doorway. But as I sped toward the exit, something caught the corner of my vision. Movement. The tall figure stepped fully out into the light. Its limbs were too long, hanging too low. Every part of its body seemed slightly delayed, like it was learning how to use its shape, and its head tilted at an angle that no human neck could sustain. My chest tightened so hard I felt something in me flare with primal panic. The thing took one step forward. Then the lights above the gas station exploded. Popping, fizzing, raining shards of glass downward like a burst of tiny electric stars. I didn't wait to see what it would do next. I reached the exit of the lot, swung onto the highway with a wide swerve that nearly tipped my trailer and pressed harder on the accelerator than I ever had in my life. The truck climbed in speed, 40, 50, 60, 70. The rearview mirror shook violently, offering only blurry streaks of darkness and light. But even though I couldn't see it, I felt it. A weight in the night pressing against the back of my skull. A certainty that something was watching me shrink into the distance. Not chasing, just observing. Like it knew something about me I didn't. After 5 miles, I finally eased my foot off the gas, though my hands still clenched the wheel with white-knuckled force. My entire body trembled as the adrenaline slowly began to drain out of my veins, leaving me hollow and sick. I needed to stop, to breathe, to think. I pulled onto a turnout, a small gravel shoulder overlooking a stretch of desert scrub. The engine idled beneath me, steady and loud, grounding me in reality. The cab lights glowed faintly, and the familiar scent of dust, diesel, and old leather wrapped around me like a weak but reassuring blanket. I told myself I'd only sit there for a few minutes, long enough to calm down, long enough to convince myself I hadn't seen what I thought I saw. But then something happened that made my blood run cold all over again. My dashboard screen flickered. A glitch of static, brief, harmless. Then it displayed something. A message I'd never seen before. No signal. Source unknown. I leaned closer, confused, heart picking up again. The screen flickered again. Then a new message appeared. Leave. For a moment, the temperature inside the cab dropped so sharply that I could see my breath bloom white in front of me. My hands trembled uncontrollably. I didn't know what to do. Didn't know if turning off the truck would trap me, or if driving any further into the desert night would take me somewhere worse. I wasn't thinking. I wasn't rational. I just stared at that glowing message until it blinked away, replaced by the normal dashboard menu as if nothing had happened at all. I reached for the gear shift, but before I could move it, I heard it again. Not through the speakers, not outside, right behind me. A voice. A voice. The same one from the back room. Weak. Broken. Look, the moment that whisper sounded behind me, so close it felt like it brushed the back of my neck, my entire body locked up. I didn't turn. Couldn't turn. Every instinct inside me screamed that whatever was back there wasn't meant to be seen directly. That if I shifted even a fraction, if I made the smallest wrong move, something terrible would unfold in the narrow space of my cab. My breath turned shallow, shaking in and out of me like my lungs couldn't remember what to do. The air wasn't cold anymore. It was frigid, a dense, unnatural chill that had no source. I could still see my breath, fogging out in front of me like I was sitting in a walk-in freezer. I didn't speak. I didn't ask who was there. Because deep down, I already knew. It was the same person from the back room, the one who tried to warn me, the one telling me now with the last of their strength not to look at them or not to look at whatever was with them. I kept my eyes fixed on the windshield, hands frozen on the wheel. A long moment passed. 3 seconds. 5. 10. Behind me, the breathing grew ragged. Not threatening. Not menacing. Just fragile. A person on the brink of vanishing. Then, faintly, it followed. My teeth clenched. A tremor ran up my spine like a thin wire tightening. My heart hammered so hard I felt its pulse in my fingers. I swallowed, forcing myself to speak without turning. Who? My voice cracked. Who followed us? Silence at first, and then, barely audible, not who. Something touched the back of my seat. Not a hand, not fingers. More like the gentle press of weight shifting forward as though someone weak, someone dying, was leaning into it with the last of their strength. The seat back creaked. Every nerve in my body flared white hot, my vision blurred. My throat tightened. The whisper came again, drifting like fog across the space between us. It listens. A scraping sound passed along the floor of the cab. Slow, uneven, something being dragged, but not by the weak voice behind me. Something else was moving, something lower, something closer to my feet. My breath hitched. My hands twitched on the wheel. The urge to look, to glance down, to confirm was overwhelming. But the voice behind me returned, urgent, breaking. Don't. I squeezed my eyes shut, nails digging into my palms, and then everything went silent. Not quiet, silent, like sound had been sucked out of the world. Like I'd stepped into a vacuum where even my heartbeat felt muted. I don't know how long that silence lasted. Could have been 2 seconds. Could have been 20. Time distorted under the pressure of absolute terror. Then, without warning, the dashboard lights flickered again. Bright, dim, bright, dim. The truck shuddered violently. Something under the cab slammed into the frame so hard the entire rig jolted. My teeth clacked together, my knees hit the underside of the wheel. Another slam, then a scrape, like claws or nails or tools dragging along metal. Whatever was outside wasn't trying to get in. It was circling. Testing the truck's shell the way a predator tests a cage it already knows will break. My breath caught in my throat. Please, the voice behind me whispered, closer now, right behind my left shoulder. Go. I didn't dare question. I didn't dare think. I reached for the gear shift with shaking hands and pushed it into drive. My foot slammed onto the accelerator. The rig roared, jerking forward. Something scraped along the undercarriage with a violent screech. Another slam hit the back end of the trailer, hard enough to make it fishtail sideways. I fought the wheel, gritting my teeth, trying to force the truck straight again. My hands felt numb, like someone else was gripping the wheel in my place. Go! The whisper behind me rasped again, filled with a sudden, frantic panic. Go now! I pushed the pedal to the floor. Rubber burned. Gravel spun out in a hail of dust. The truck leapt onto the pavement and surged forward. The screeching under the cab faded, replaced by a heavy thud that seemed to land somewhere behind the trailer. I didn't look. I didn't even breathe until the engine's roar was the only sound left in the world. For miles, I drove without blinking, without thinking, just moving, trying to outrun a place that didn't want to be left behind. After about 20 minutes, I risked a glance in the rearview mirror. Nothing there, just empty road shrinking into the dark. No movement, no shapes, no glowing figures, no impossible silhouettes watching from the shoulder. I finally exhaled a long, shaky breath that made my whole body tremble. Slowly, cautiously, I pulled off at a rest area lit by a single old sodium lamp. The light was harsh and yellow, buzzing like an angry insect. Normally, it would have irritated me. Tonight, it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. I kept the truck idling, kept my hands gripping the wheel, kept my eyes forward. But eventually, I forced myself to look back. No one was behind me. The backseat was empty. The air wasn't cold anymore. I was alone, or at least that's what I told myself. I climbed out of the cab on shaking legs. The asphalt radiated the leftover heat of the day. Crickets chirped somewhere in the scrub, and the night felt normal again, honest, natural. I leaned against the truck, trying to catch my breath. That's when I felt something in my pocket. A piece of paper. Crumpled, damp, heavy with cold. I hadn't put anything in my pocket. Slowly, very slowly, I pulled it out. It was a gas station receipt. The logo at the top read, Ash Fork Service and Supply, June 14th, 2021, 12:19 a.m. I stared at it, heart pounding. The receipt listed no items, no fuel, no totals, just one thing typed near the bottom, a single line. It hears you. My hands fumbled, dropping the slip of paper onto the pavement. I stumbled back, breath caught high in my throat. The sodium lamp overhead flickered, once, just once, and for a moment, the shadows on the ground stretched too long, too thin, the way that figure had beneath the store awning. And then everything steadied. The lamp returned to normal. The shadows shrank back to what shadows should be. I left the receipt on the pavement. I climbed back into the truck, and I drove until the sky turned pale with morning. I didn't speak. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't even clear my throat. I was terrified that whatever had listened that night was still listening. When I finally reached the distribution center in Flagstaff, I parked the truck and walked straight to the supervisor's office, quitting on the spot. Couldn't explain why, didn't try. I just knew I wasn't getting behind the wheel again. Not alone, not at night, not with the endless dark turning every mile into a risk I couldn't justify. I never went back to trucking. I work a warehouse job now. I sleep at home. I keep lights on in every room after sundown. I avoid long highways unless I absolutely have to. I looked for Ash Fork Service and Supply later. Online. On maps. On forums. Nothing. It doesn't exist. And the locals say there's never been a station where I described. One old guy at a diner told me something I still hear in my nightmares. If you saw a light out there, and there ain't supposed to be one, it wasn't for you. It was to get you. I don't know what followed me that night. I don't know what waited behind that door in the dark. I don't know what whispered warnings with the last strength it had, but I learned something I won't ever forget. Some places on the road aren't places at all. They're traps. They're watchers. They're hungry. And if you ever find yourself outside a silent gas station in the middle of nowhere, lights glowing when everything around them sleeps, don't investigate. Don't refuel. Don't go inside. Just leave. Because not everything waiting for travelers in the dark wants you to make it home. The desert has a way of silencing a man, stripping him down to whatever truth he's been running from, forcing him to listen to things he's spent his entire life pretending not to hear. My name is Elias Ward. I'm 46 years old, and I've been driving trucks across the American Southwest for more than 2 decades. I was raised in Yuma, not far from where this story happened, so I've always felt like I understood the desert, its temperature swings, its strange moods, the way sound travels in ribbons at night. But what happened outside Quartzsite in August of 2020, that was different. That was the first time I realized some places aren't just empty, they're waiting. I remember the night so clearly, it's like it's burned into the back of my skull. It was around 11:30 p.m., heat clinging to the world even after the sun had dropped. The air had that metallic scent it gets after a day of too much sun on sand and rusted metal. I'd been hauling auto parts out of Phoenix, planning to stop in Quartzsite for a few hours of rest before pushing toward California. That road, Interstate 10, always had a rhythm I trusted. A straight line, predictable, familiar. But once you pass the last gas station and the lights thin out, something shifts. The darkness there isn't just absence, it feels deliberate. Around that stretch, the desert starts to flatten out on both sides. You see distant mountains at the edges, but they're faint, like shadows of shadows. That night, even the stars seemed strangely low, like they were leaning in, watching. I didn't notice the first sign until the radio crackled. Hard, sharp, not static. More like a voice had tried to come through and didn't quite make it. I tapped the console, but the signal didn't return. It just stayed quiet. That silence, that was the first thing that made my skin crawl. Most people don't understand how loud a truck cabin really is, even at night. The hum, the tire friction, the vibration through the steering wheel, there's always something. But in that moment, everything muted. The engine still ran, the wheels still rolled, but it all felt muffled, as if the world had taken a breath and held it. For a minute, I convinced myself it was exhaustion. I'd been running long hours that week, sleeping poorly in a different parking lot every night. But then I saw it. A flicker of light off to my left beyond the highway, hovering above the desert floor. At first I thought it was a distant ATV or maybe a camper lantern, but it was too bright, too steady. And it wasn't casting light downward the way it should. It glowed outward like it was swelling against the dark. I slowed a little, trying to keep my eyes on the road while watching the thing. It wasn't moving fast, more like drifting, following me at a distance. For a long while, I tried to rationalize it. Weather balloon, aircraft, some ranch property I didn't know about. But deep down, beneath the logic, something older stirred. Something instinctive. A pulse of dread that felt too specific to ignore. Because the longer I watched it, the clearer it became that the light wasn't reflecting off the air around it. It wasn't illuminating dust or cactus or anything. It was swallowing its surroundings, like the space around it got darker whenever it moved. I didn't want to admit it, but I knew then it was watching me too. I kept driving. I told myself not to stare, not to feed into the panic building in my chest. I turned the radio dial, hoping to get any noise back, even commercials, but all I got was a whispering sound, so soft I couldn't tell if it was real or just in my mind. It had a shape to it, though, like the start of a word, like someone trying to speak through layers of water. By the time I reached the outskirts of Quartzsite, the light had drifted closer. Close enough that I could see it wasn't round. It pulsed in uneven shapes, stretching and contracting like breathing. I pulled into a small dirt turnout just before town, the kind truckers use when they're too tired to keep going. The moment I stopped, everything inside me dropped into a cold, heavy dread. The light had paused too, as if waiting for me to make the next move. I shut off the engine. The desert swallowed the hum immediately, leaving a ringing quiet. I opened the door and stepped outside, half expecting the air to scorch me. But instead, a wave of cold rolled through the heat, unnatural, like stepping in front of an open freezer. My breath didn't fog, but the temperature shift hit my bones. I told myself not to look at the light. I told myself to get back in the truck, lock the doors, pull back onto the highway. But something in that cold air pressed against me, coaxing, tugging at that old, buried trauma I hadn't thought about in years. 14 years earlier, I'd lost a close friend, another trucker, on a route near Gila Bend. His rig was found abandoned on the side of the road, door wide open, keys still in the ignition. No tracks, no signs of struggle, just silence and an empty desert. People called it dehydration, disorientation, maybe a stroke. But I'd seen the look in his eyes the week before he vanished, like he'd noticed something the rest of us didn't. I'd never believed he just wandered off. And now, standing in that freezing desert pocket with that unnatural light swelling and shrinking above the sand, I felt the old fear slam back into me. The connection was too strong to ignore, too familiar. I finally forced myself to look. But what I saw wasn't just a light anymore. It had lowered to maybe 20 feet off the ground. It had a texture now, thin strands like translucent fibers drifting off it and disappearing into the air. Not smoke, not fog, something else, something I couldn't explain. And there was a sound coming from it. Not loud, but rhythmic. A pulsing throb that synced with my heartbeat until I couldn't tell which was which. I stepped backward toward the truck without realizing it. The moment I touched the door handle, the sound shifted. It sharpened into a short, clipped pattern like knocking. 3 slow taps repeated in uneven intervals. The hairs on my neck rose instantly because I'd heard that pattern before, once, years ago. From the CB radio on a night just like this one, shortly before my friend disappeared. 3 knocks, a pause, 2 more. At the time I'd brushed it off, bad signal, debris interference, something boring and real. But now, hearing it again from this thing floating over the desert floor, my stomach twisted. The knocking got louder, not mechanically, not as if amplified, more like it was happening inside my skull. I yanked the truck door open and climbed inside, slamming it shut. My hands shook as I fumbled with the keys. The knocking continued, louder, faster. Not from the light now, from the roof of my cab. I froze. The roof among trucks like mine is metal, solid. It doesn't echo unless something physically hits it. And that knocking, that pattern, it was real. Direct. 3 slow taps, a pause. 2 more. Stop, I whispered without meaning to. Begging, not commanding. The knocking stopped. I didn't dare breathe. For a full 5 seconds, the world went still. Then something dragged across the roof, lightly, like fingertips. I could hear it moving toward the windshield. I couldn't make myself look up. My jaw locked, my pulse thrashed in my throat. Then, softly, my radio clicked on. Static, faint but deliberate, filled the cabin. Then a voice, thin, distant, trembling behind layers of distortion. Elias. My blood iced over. No one, and I mean no one, knew I'd stopped there. No one should have been able to reach my radio on that channel. The voice sounded familiar too. Not perfectly, like an old recording warping in and out, but familiar enough that my mind made the connection before I let myself believe it. It sounded like my friend, the one who vanished. My breath stuttered. No, I whispered. No. No. But the voice pushed through again, this time closer, more urgent. You shouldn't be here. The knocking resumed, harder, as if insisting, driving something into me. Fear, memory, instinct, they all collided until I felt I was slipping out of my own body. I shifted the truck into drive and floored it. But as I sped toward the quartzite lights in the distance, the thing in the sky began following me, fast, silent, pulsing with that impossible glow that bent the darkness around it. And the voice on the radio did not stop. Not until the highway lights began to reappear. Not until something else, something worse, happened just a few miles later, when the desert finally gave way to the first scattered lights of quartzite. I thought the glow of the town would push that thing back, make it retreat into whatever dark corner it had come from. That's how it usually works with fear. You think light will fix it. You think other people, even strangers asleep behind cheap motel walls, will make the terror smaller. But fear has its own geography, its own rules, and that night it didn't retreat. It grew. The deeper I rolled into quartzite, the more the world around me felt wrong. Not dangerous. Not threatening, just altered, like someone had picked up the town and placed it slightly off alignment. The lights from the gas stations and RV parks looked fuzzy at the edges, dimmed by something thick in the air. The billboards that usually glowed bright were flickering, blinking in and out like a power grid under stress. And the cold followed me. It clung to the cabin even as I passed rows of trailers, convenience stores, signs advertising ice-cold drinks. My windshield had a thin haze along the edges, like frost, but it wasn't cold enough outside for condensation. When I wiped a circle with my sleeve, the smear reformed within seconds. The radio hissed beside me, but the voice was gone. The knocking had stopped. Yet I could still feel the impression of it, like phantom pressure on my scalp, my chest, my ribs, as if the sound had gotten inside me. I pulled into a truck stop on the far end of town, the kind of place where the lights always hum and the pavement stays warm all night. A few rigs were parked for the evening, their cabins glowing with TV screens or reading lamps. For the first time since pulling off the highway, I let myself breathe. But breathing didn't help. It only made me aware of something worse. The smell. At first I thought it was oil or engine heat, but no. It drifted in gently, like an unwanted memory, metallic, sharp, thin. Almost like the scent that rises when lightning hits too close. It filled the cabin, curled into the back of my throat. I stepped out of the truck to escape it. The moment I did, the smell vanished, but something else was waiting. Silence. A silence too complete for a town that size. Even at night, quartzite should have had background noise. Engines rolling past, cicadas buzzing, radios leaking through cracked windows, the constant shifting of desert wind. But there was nothing, not even the faint hum of the tall floodlights overhead. Another wave of cold drifted over me. I stood there for a long moment, hands trembling slightly, trying to gather enough courage to walk inside the station. I kept waiting for someone, anyone, to open a door, step out for air, make a sound. But nobody did. The windows looked lit from the inside, yet I couldn't make out shapes or movement. Just a soft, pale glow. I took a step toward the entrance, then another. But as I approached the glass, something tightened in my chest. Not fear, pressure. Like someone had hooked a hand through my ribs and tugged me backward. My breath hitched. I stopped walking. For a moment, the world tilted. And then I saw it, reflected in the glass door behind me. The light, hovering just above the row of parked rigs. Not drifting now, closer, lower. And this time it wasn't a smooth, pulsing glow. It looked fractured, like a cracked shell. Thin lines split the light into segments, as if something inside was pushing out against the surface. The strands of luminous fibers that trailed off it were longer now, drifting in slow arcs across the air like they were searching for something. My stomach dropped. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. My legs felt locked in place, my fingers numb. All I could do was stare at its reflection, watch as the thing floated between the trucks, moving without sound, its presence warping the air around it until the distant lights flickered like dying flames. Then one of the floodlights overhead popped. A shower of sparks rained down, and the thing reacted. The fractured light flared, swelling outward in a shape my mind never fully grasped, like multiple halves shifting over each other, like wings made of pure luminescence folding and unfolding. The cold intensified so fast I felt the breath punch out of my lungs. And in that frozen moment, something inside me broke. I forced myself to move, not run, not scream, just move. I stumbled back to my rig, fumbled with the door handle, threw myself inside. The moment the door slammed shut, the windows clouded with that same frost-like haze, thick enough that I couldn't see out. My hands shook violently as I jammed the keys into the ignition. The engine roared, thank God, but the cabin lights flickered like dying candles. For a terrible second, I thought the truck wouldn't respond, that the cold had sunk into its wiring, its batteries, its bones. But as soon as I threw it into gear and pulled out of the lot, something inside me shifted. A voice. Not from the radio. Not from outside. From memory. My friend's voice, clearer now than it had been through the static. Don't stop this time. I didn't plan my route. I didn't think about fuel. I didn't think about anything except speed and escape. I drove west toward the darkest stretch of highway because it was the only direction free of the thing's reflection. Behind me, the mirrors stayed fogged, but the light followed, glowing faintly behind the frost, its outline flickering like a dying star trying desperately not to go out. I don't remember the first 15 miles clearly. Adrenaline blurred everything into a series of instinctual motions. Hands white-knuckled on the wheel, foot pressed hard on the pedal, breath coming in shallow gulps. The desert stretched around me in endless waves of shadow, broken only by the occasional road sign or distant ridge. But around the 20-mile mark, right where the highway bends slightly through a long patch of open nothing, the truck shuddered, not mechanically, as if something heavy had landed on the roof. My jaw clenched. I stared straight ahead, refusing to look up. The wind outside didn't change, the air didn't ripple, nothing physically confirmed what I felt. But I knew something was there. The weight was too real, too specific. A pressure so cold it seeped through the ceiling and into my scalp. Then the knocking started again. Soft at first, deliberate. 3 taps, a pause, 2 more, the exact same pattern. I fought to keep the wheel steady, fought against the instinct to slam the brakes, scream, abandon the truck, run into the desert and disappear just like he did. But survival isn't always about bravery. Sometimes it's just stubbornness. I'd lost too many people to this desert. Friends, acquaintances, drivers I barely knew but shared miles with. I wasn't going to let it take me too. Leave me alone, I whispered, voice cracking. The knocking stopped, then something slid along the roof, slowly like a hand searching for a grip. The cold thickened until my breaths turned shallow, my vision tunneling at the edges. A faint hum filled the cabin, vibrating through the steering wheel, merging with my heartbeat in a way that made me feel like the two were sinking again. I gritted my teeth, pressed harder on the gas, and then, suddenly, the mirrors cleared. Just a little. Enough that I could see a sliver of the world behind me, enough to see the light shift in the sky, rising into the air like it was being pulled backward. It flickered, dimmed, then flared brighter, revealing something within its fractured shell, an indistinct shape, almost human, almost reaching. My heart slammed. It wasn't just watching me, it was trying to follow me, trying to reach me, trying to call me. The radio clicked on again. Static, then a voice. Broken, strained, barely holding together. Elias, keep driving. My friend again, but this time the words carried something else beneath them. Pain, distance, a kind of pull, like he was being dragged backward while trying to speak. The hum intensified. The windshield flickered with thin lines of light, like fingers pressing outward from the glass. My chest tightened so hard I gasped. "Elias, don't stop!" The voice cut out. The radio snapped to silence, and the light behind me flared in one final, impossible burst, so bright it turned the desert white, the mountains black silhouettes, the sky a dome of burning silver. I braced for impact, but instead, the light collapsed inward like a punctured lung and vanished. Just vanished. The cold broke instantly. The air warmed. The desert sounds returned all at once. The wind, the distant hum of highway poles, the faint buzz of insects. My truck lurched forward as if freed from a massive weight. I didn't stop driving until I reached Blythe. When I finally pulled into a truck stop, dawn was bleeding over the horizon. My hands were still shaking. My shirt was damp with sweat. My breath came in uneven bursts. But the smell was gone. The cold was gone. And the knocking hasn't followed me since. People always ask why truckers believe strange things, why so many of us quietly admit that the desert changes you. They think we exaggerate. They think long hours and loneliness warp our senses. Maybe sometimes that's true. But not that night. Not those lights. I still don't know what I saw. I don't know what tried to follow me, or what was inside that fractured glow. I don't know what happened to my friend all those years ago. All I know is something out there remembers us, tracks us, looks for patterns in the people who pass through its territory. And sometimes, when the night is deep enough, when the desert is quiet enough, it reaches back. If there's anything I learned that night, it's this. Trust your instincts. Trust your fear. Trust the part of you that senses the shift before the danger appears. The desert doesn't give warnings twice, and if you ever see a light floating over the sand outside Quartzsite, don't stop. Don't listen. And whatever you do, don't look back. I've been on the road long enough to know when a town carries a weight behind its smile, something heavy, something it doesn't want strangers to ask about. But Seligman had a different kind of weight, like the whole place was holding its breath the night I rolled in. And maybe that's why this story begins with a sentence I never thought I'd speak out loud. Sometimes the road reveals things you wish you had never seen. My name is Reed McAllister. I'm 42 years old, and I've been a long-haul truck driver since before GPS trackers made it impossible for a man to disappear for a few hours. I grew up outside Bakersfield, but the road raised me more than any childhood home ever did. And by now, I've learned to read towns the way some people read faces. The cracks, the jittery shadows, the way lights stay on too long or windows stay shut even on warm nights. I passed through Seligman on October 18th, 2023, just a little past 9 p.m., hauling a load of HVAC parts from Barstow to Flagstaff. I had planned to stop only for fuel and maybe a quick bite, but as the miles stretched flat under the desert moon, I felt a strange pull toward that neon-lit strip of Route 66. Something about it, maybe the silence, maybe the slow-moving glow, made me want to step out of the cab and breathe something other than diesel and loneliness. The air hit me first. It was colder than it should have been for October. Not the kind of cold that comes from weather, but the kind that slithers into your clothes and makes your bones feel watched. A dry, metallic chill like standing too close to an open freezer filled with rust. I shrugged it off like drivers do. We always shrug things off until we can't anymore. I parked near the old boardwalk-style storefronts, those wooden planks that tourists take pictures with during the day, but locals avoid once the sun goes down. The lights flickered in that familiar Route 66 nostalgia, but there was something wrong with them. The bulbs buzzed like they were straining to stay lit, and the signs swayed even though there wasn't enough wind to lift a leaf. I remember thinking it was strange how empty everything felt. No traffic, no chatter. Not even the hum of a distant TV. Just the crunch of gravel under my boots and a distant whistle that didn't belong to any train I knew. I walked toward the boardwalk, planning to stretch my legs before grabbing food from the diner at the corner. But halfway there, I stopped. The wooden planks, old, warped, gray from years of heat, were lifted slightly in one spot, like something underneath had pressed upward. Not enough to trip anyone, but enough to notice under the moonlight. That bump should have meant nothing. Towns like this always had loose boards. But as I stepped closer, a smell crept out from the gap, and it wasn't rot or sewage or anything living. It was cold. Yes, cold had a smell. A sterile, almost metallic frost mixed with something faintly sweet, like the scent of a freezer that hasn't been opened in years. And it drifted up slowly, curling around my ankles. My first instinct was to back away. My second was to tell myself I was imagining it. That tug of war between instinct and rationalization was a battle I'd grown used to. Truck drivers spend so much time alone, we convince ourselves we're overreacting to shadows or sounds. But that smell, it clawed its way up my throat. I kneeled and pressed my fingers lightly against the warped plank. The wood was cold, not cool. Cold, like ice pressed against my skin. And then something moved underneath it. Just a ripple, a slow, pushing swell. The wood lifted half an inch and settled again, as though something long and heavy had just slid past. I froze. I held my breath so long my chest burned. A light breeze scraped down the empty street, pushing grit and dust along the road, and even that tiny sound felt too loud. Probably just an animal, I whispered to myself, but I didn't believe it. Animals don't make wood cold, and they sure as hell don't move with purpose. I stood and stepped back. My boots clacked on the planks and echoed farther than they should have, bouncing off buildings with a hollow, unnatural ring. Then, from somewhere beneath the boardwalk, I heard it. A soft, rhythmic tapping. Tap, tap, tap. Like knuckles on wood, patient and deliberate. I felt my heart push up into my throat. I didn't want to react. Didn't want to show fear in a place that already felt like it was watching me. So I swallowed hard and forced myself to look around. The street was still empty. The signs still flickered. The cold smell still drifted around me like a ghost. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from directly under where I stood. I stepped back, fast. The tapping stopped. For a long moment, nothing moved. The air hung tight, like the town had paused to listen. My breath came out in shallow puffs, but even those felt muffled, like the cold was swallowing the sound before it could rise. I could have left. I should have left. Every instinct I had was begging me to return to my truck, lock the doors, and keep driving until the sunrise erased whatever I had felt. But something held me there. Not curiosity. This wasn't that kind of pull. It was something deeper, something tied to a piece of myself I didn't like to acknowledge. My past. The reason I stayed on the road. The reason I avoided people. I had lost someone because I ignored warning signs once, ignored the feeling in my gut because I didn't want to sound paranoid, and I'd promised myself I would never walk away again when something felt wrong, even if it terrified me. So I crouched again, hands trembling, and leaned in close to the warped board. My breath fogged in a thin mist as it hit the wood. "Hello?" I whispered. For a moment, nothing. Then a slow drag. Something scraped along the underside of the planks, moving toward me. Not claws, not nails. Something smoother. Heavier, like skin sliding across old timber. I stood abruptly, my pulse thrashing so hard in my ears I couldn't hear the scraping anymore. I backed onto the asphalt, needing distance between myself and whatever that cold, unseen thing was. Across the street, one of the neon signs flickered violently before going out completely. The whole block dimmed with it, plunging everything into a deeper, heavier darkness than the night should have allowed. My truck sat under the only functioning street lamp, the light stuttering like it was struggling to hold back the dark. That's when I heard a voice. Not from the boardwalk. From behind me. "Don't step on the wood when it's breathing." I spun, adrenaline slamming through every vein. A man stood a few feet away, half in light, half in shadow. Late 60s, maybe older, with a lined face and the kind of stillness that comes from living too many years in the same haunted place. He didn't move toward me, didn't flinch. His eyes were fixed on the planks behind me. "What the hell is under there?" I asked. He shook his head slowly. "Not a hell I can explain, but if you're smart, you'll leave before it decides you're interesting." A wind pushed down the street then, carrying dust and that strange metallic cold, and as it moved across the boardwalk, the planks flexed, barely but enough, like something below had inhaled. I felt my body lock. The old man whispered, almost too quietly to hear, "It's been moving more since October started." I swallowed hard. "What is it?" His eyes finally moved to mine, and there was fear there, real fear, something that doesn't belong to us anymore. Behind me, a deep thud sounded beneath the wood, heavy, slow, intentional, and the entire ground seemed to shiver. The thud rolled through the planks like a pulse, slow and deliberate, and the old man's eyes snapped back toward the boardwalk. For the first time, I saw his composure crack, his jaw tensed, his breath hitched, and something in that moment, something about a man his age being afraid of anything in a town this small, made my own fear sharpen. I stepped closer to him, keeping my voice low. "Why aren't you running?" "Ran once," he whispered. "Didn't help." His gaze drifted toward the storefronts lining the street, the old Wild West facades meant to charm tourists. Most of the windows were dark, but now that I looked closely, I saw small slivers of movement behind the curtains, shadows pulling back. Watching. People were inside. People were awake. And not one of them came out. They were waiting, or hiding. The old man's voice shook when he spoke again. "It listens when we move. It learns. It changes. And every year it gets a little more bold." Another tremor shivered through the wood, traveling outward in a ripple. I could feel it in my boots, even though I stood on the pavement. A second thud followed, closer this time, like something shifting its weight. If things like that even had weight. "What does it want?" I whispered. His answer was immediate. "Light." The word hung in the air, strange and wrong. Light? That didn't make sense. Not for something crawling beneath a wooden boardwalk. Not for something that smelled like cold metal and moved like it wasn't made of bones. "It comes up for warmth," he said, "but the light burns it, so it stays beneath, waiting for dark or silence or someone careless enough to step too close." The street lamp above my truck flickered again, once, twice, and then dimmed to a dull, dying glow. The temperature dropped with it, sweeping down the block in a wave of icy dread. The old man swallowed. "We should go inside." But I didn't move, not because I was brave, but because something inside me, some leftover guilt from the person I once failed, wouldn't let me walk away. Not yet. Not while something alive, something unknown, pushed itself closer to the surface of this quiet little town. Another scraping sound swept beneath the planks, long and wet, a dragging motion. It made the wood bend like rubber. I felt my chest tighten, my pulse race. "How long has this been happening?" I asked. The old man let out a breath that sounded more like defeat than relief. "Decades. Maybe longer, but it started growing restless last year. People began hearing it during the day. Some swore they saw the boards lift on their own. And no one called authorities?" He laughed flatly, without humor. "Someone did. They didn't last long." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. The silence that followed was louder than any answer he could have given. Then, abruptly, the boards near the center of the walkway erupted upward, just an inch, but violently enough that dust burst from the cracks. A harsh, guttural scrape rose from beneath, like something large shifting against wood that had never meant to hold it. The old man's voice dropped into a shaky whisper. "It's coming closer." I felt my instincts finally override my hesitation. We need to move. But before either of us could step back, the scent changed. The cold metallic smell sharpened, turning acrid. Chemical. Wrong. It filled my throat, my sinuses, my lungs. It was like breathing in the residue of a freezer burn mixed with something biological, something that had no business existing in a human world. My knees weakened. I reached for something to steady myself, but there was nothing nearby except empty air and rising fear. A thin wisp of fog slipped through one of the gaps between the boards. Pale, almost luminescent, drifting upward in a slow spiral. When it touched the open air, it recoiled as if the night itself stung it, and then it began to pull back down. No. Get dragged down. Something below inhaled. The suction was subtle at first, pulling dust and cold air down into the cracks. But then the pull grew, deepening until my hair shifted slightly toward the boardwalk. The old man staggered back. Get away from it! I stepped back with him, heart pounding so hard I felt my pulse echo in my fingertips. But as we retreated, the planks moved again, this time rising much higher. A long, arched swell traveled down the length of the boardwalk like a wave beneath a wooden ocean. And then I saw it. A shape. Just the faintest silhouette through the cracks. Elongated, too long, like the outline of a spine pressed against the underside of the boards. But it wasn't bone. It moved too fluidly, too deliberately. The old man choked on a breath. God help us! The street lamp above my truck blinked violently, then buzzed, then went out. The darkness that followed wasn't normal. It fell too quickly, too completely, swallowing the entire block in seconds. All at once, the temperature plummeted, the metallic cold surging outward as if freed from something that once held it back. And in the darkness beneath the boardwalk, something exhaled. A deep, resonant, hollow breath that rolled outward like a wave of cold wind. I felt it hit my legs, my chest, my face. My teeth ached from the temperature shift. The old man grabbed my arm. His fingers were trembling violently. Inside, he hissed. Now. He pulled me toward a shop door just as the boardwalk behind us buckled sharply upward. A plank snapped, cracking in half with a sharp, brittle pop. Wood splintered into the air. Something moved beneath it. Fast. I didn't have time to look. He shoved me through the doorway and slammed the door shut behind us. He locked one deadbolt, then another, and then slid a metal bar into place with shaking hands. He didn't turn on a light. Why are we sitting in the dark? I whispered. It sees heat, he murmured, and it listens for vibration. If we stay still and stay cold, it might pass. My breath felt loud in the air. Too loud. I forced myself to draw quieter ones, shallow, slow. A low vibration passed beneath the floorboards of the shop. Not a tremor, more like a glide, a smooth, shifting movement that traveled the length of the building and stopped directly beneath us. The silence that followed was suffocating. I didn't dare move. Neither did he. And then, tap. Not from wood, from the floor beneath us. Tap, tap, tap. My heart stopped. It was mimicking us, mimicking the sound I'd made earlier. The old man leaned in close enough that I felt his breath on my ear. Don't answer it. Tap, tap, tap. It grew louder, more urgent, more insistent. Then, slowly, the floor beneath my boots began to cool. Not like cold air, not like a draft. Like something was pulling the warmth out of the room. A slow drain, a sinking of temperature that made my breath turn to vapor in front of me. The old man sagged against the wall, whispering shakily, "It's feeding." And something inside me snapped. Not out of bravery, not out of stupidity, out of the same guilt that had followed me for years, the guilt that wouldn't let me stand frozen while something hunted in the dark. I crouched low and whispered, "What drives it away?" He swallowed hard. Light, but not the kind we have. It needs heat, intensity. Sunlight hurts it most. I looked toward the boarded window. Dawn was hours away, but my truck, I had an industrial-strength work lamp in the cab, a high-powered LED floodlight we used for nighttime repairs. If I could get to it, if I could get back to the truck. A sharp impact hit the floor beneath us. Then another. The boards groaned. Dust rained down from the ceiling. "It knows we're here," the old man croaked. The creature below scraped again, harder this time, as if searching for a weak spot. Tap, tap, tap. The sound climbed into my skull, crawling under my skin. I tightened my jaw. I'm getting out of here. That's suicide. Staying might be worse. Another violent shudder ripped through the building. I took a breath so deep it felt like my ribs might crack. And then I ran. The creature reacted instantly. The floor behind me exploded upward in a burst of splintered wood as something massive slammed against it. The entire building lurched. I threw the door open and sprinted into the street. The night was pitch black. The cold smell was everywhere. The boardwalk heaved upward behind me like something enormous was crawling through a trench. I ran for my truck, boots pounding against the asphalt, every step echoing like an invitation to whatever hunted beneath the town. Something struck the underside of the street. Pavement cracked behind me. I reached the cab, yanked the door open, grabbed the work lamp from behind the seat, and spun. A swell of wood rolled toward me down the boardwalk, pushing up planks like a breaching whale. The shape beneath was huge, wrong, fluid. The smell hit me so hard I gagged. I pointed the floodlight and clicked it on. The beam tore through the darkness in a blinding white arc. What rose from the boardwalk recoiled instantly. A long, arching silhouette bent backward, retreating beneath the planks with unnatural speed. The boards slammed down behind it, shaking the entire block. A shrill, guttural sound reverberated from below, something like a scream, but too deep, too layered, too ancient. The street lamp flickered back to life. One by one, lights in the building snapped on. And as the glow spread, the entire boardwalk went still. The cold smell evaporated. Silence rolled back in. I didn't breathe until my lungs forced me to. In the window across the street, the old man stared at me with an expression I couldn't read: fear, relief, disbelief. Maybe all three. The creature didn't reemerge. It didn't move again. But the ground beneath Seligman felt different now, as if something had been awake, truly awake, for the first time in years. I backed toward my truck, lamp still in hand, and climbed into the cab. My hands shook as I turned the key. Before I pulled away, the old man stepped outside. He didn't cross the street, didn't raise his voice. He just said 3 words that echoed long after the engine rumbled to life. It remembers faces. I drove through the night without stopping, without blinking, without letting myself think about the truth beneath that boardwalk. But even now, months later, when I close my eyes and feel the road humming beneath my wheels, I hear that tapping. Soft, patient, learning. And I know Seligman isn't done with me yet. The night I learned what fear really sounds like began with a scream I couldn't tell was human. My name is Evan Mercer. I'm 39 years old, and for the last 14 years, I've been hauling freight across the country, enough miles to memorize the way America breathes after dark. You learn things on the road. You learn which towns feel off before you even roll through them, which gas stations you never want to park beside, which patches of highway seem to swallow up sound the way deep water does. But nothing ever prepared me for Holbrook. It was February of 2019, the kind of night where the cold presses against the truck cab like it's trying to come inside. A storm was building over the desert, burying the stars behind a thick, unmoving ceiling of cloud. My heater had been cutting in and out since Gallup, and the engine was starting to give off that faint metallic tick that always meant trouble was coming. I told myself I could push another 50 miles, maybe even 60. But the truth was simple. I was exhausted, I was freezing, and my instincts, the ones I'd spent years ignoring, told me to get off the road. So I pulled into Holbrook, and Holbrook didn't feel asleep. It felt abandoned mid-breath. There's a weight deserts carry at night, something dry and ancient that makes your lungs feel smaller. The way the wind moves through dead grass, it sounds like whispering, like conversation too quiet to make out. But in Holbrook that night, the silence felt engineered, like someone had taken sound away on purpose. My headlights slid across empty parking lots, boarded up shops, flickering motel signs that hummed like they were barely alive. That's how I found the Sunburst Motel, a horseshoe-shaped building with turquoise doors that looked good in daylight but felt wrong at 1:47 a.m. The sign buzzed overhead, stabbing the darkness with electric light that didn't reach the far corners of the lot. The office door was propped open with a brick, and inside the manager sat behind the front desk with a portable heater blowing on his legs. He didn't ask me what I was hauling or where I'd come from. He barely looked at me. When I slid my ID across the counter, he just nodded once and said, "Second floor, last room on the left. Don't open the door for anyone." His voice wasn't threatening. It was tired, like he'd said those same words too many times. I almost asked him what that meant, but something in me froze the words in my throat. You learn to listen to that quiet internal tightening, the feeling that if you speak, you might commit yourself to something you can't undo. The stairs creaked under my boots as I climbed. The air smelled like dust, old paint, and a hint of something sour, like damp carpet that hadn't fully dried. The hallway lights flickered in a slow, rhythmic pulse that made the shadows move just enough to keep your eyes searching. And each door I passed seemed slightly misaligned, like they'd been forced open at some point and never properly refitted. My room, room 27, had a door that stuck before it opened, like something heavy had once been pushed against it. The inside was cleaner than I expected. Sparse. Unsettled. A room waiting for someone who might not stay long. I dropped my duffel on the bed, kicked off my boots, and ran the faucet in the bathroom. The pipes groaned, the water sputtered, and the mirror above the sink vibrated faintly as if something were moving behind the wall. That sound, that dull trembling, should have bothered me more. But the truth is, I'd grown good at explaining things away. Truck driving doesn't pair well with imagination. You hear strange noises in truck stops, old motels, midnight rest areas. If you let every unexplained sound crawl under your skin, you'd never sleep on the road again. Still, something about Holbrook felt different, felt familiar, in the worst possible way. Because the truth I rarely say out loud is that I grew up in a small desert town where silence meant danger, not peace, where sound, especially after dark, had a personality, a kind of hunger. When I was 12, I heard screams outside my bedroom window that didn't belong to any animal native to the Southwest. My father told me it was wind twisting through canyon rock. My mother never said anything at all, but the way her hands shook as she checked the locks told me she didn't believe that story either. I thought I'd outgrown that kind of fear. I thought adulthood insulated me. Holbrook reminded me how wrong I was. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, letting the heater thaw the stiffness in my fingers. The wind outside scraped something metallic across the parking lot, maybe an old shopping cart, maybe a loose sign. It was steady, repetitive, and oddly timed, as if the wind wasn't the one moving it. Around 3:12 a.m., I heard footsteps above me. Slow, heavy, crossing from one end of the ceiling to the other. The manager had told me I was on the second floor. There wasn't supposed to be a third. I sat up, holding my breath. The footsteps paused, then started again, this time directly above the bed. The ceiling dust shifted. The light dimmed, then brightened. Then silence. Not normal silence, the kind that feels like a held breath. I stood and walked to the window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to look out. That's when I noticed something strange. The entire second floor, every room except mine, was completely dark. No TVs, no phone lights, no shadows moving behind blinds. The parking lot held only my truck and an old blue sedan coated in dust, thick enough to suggest it hadn't moved in weeks. Holbrook wasn't empty. It was waiting. I backed away from the window and lay down again, telling myself to sleep. Telling myself I was being paranoid. Telling myself the footsteps were pipes expanding or animals or literally anything else. But then came the scream. It hit the air like it had been thrown. Sharp, wet, human, but not fully. I sat up so fast I felt something pull in my neck. The scream didn't repeat. It just hung in the hallway in a way sound usually doesn't, like it clung to the walls. I listened for movement, running, panic, voices, but the motel stayed still, almost intentionally still. I grabbed my boots, not lacing them, and stepped outside my room. Cold slammed into me instantly. The hallway lights flickered overhead, softer now, like they were trying not to be noticed. Everything smelled faintly of stale cigarettes, but underneath it was something else. Something like rust, old rust, the kind that tastes metallic on your tongue. There was no one in the hall. But the scream, it hadn't been far. It had come from the left near the stairwell. I took a few slow steps, every instinct in my body screaming at me to go back inside, to lock the door, to forget I'd heard anything. But denial has a way of convincing you you're being brave, that you're confronting something instead of walking straight into it. Halfway down the hall, the air temperature dropped so sharply my breath came out in a white cloud. My fingertips went numb. The lights flickered again, once, twice, then steadied. A sound scraping against the inside of a door. Slow, dragging, rhythmic. Room 23. I pressed my ear against the wood. No breathing, no speaking. Just that scraping sound, like fingernails or maybe something harder, tracing the inside of the door in short, uneven strokes. My pulse thudded in my ears. My hands began to tremble. I stepped back, ready to run, and then something on the other side of the door pressed against it. Not forcefully, just enough to bend the wood inward, just enough to let me know it was aware of me. That's when the second scream came. And this one. This one sounded like it was right behind me. The second scream tore through the hallway so close it felt hot against the back of my neck, and I spun around, stumbling into the wall. There was no one there, no footsteps retreating, no shadow ducking around the corner, just empty space stretching toward my room, lit in that shaky, jaundiced glow of dying bulbs. But the air was wrong. It felt occupied. Something moved past me. Not physically, not in a way I could see, but in pressure, in temperature. The hallway exhaled a cold breath that wrapped around my ribs like hands. I staggered backward, my shoulders slamming into the doorknob of room 23. The scraping on the other side stopped instantly, as if whatever was inside had turned its attention elsewhere, and the lights above me began to hum. The hum grew louder, vibrating in my teeth, and for a moment the light lengthened, not brighter, just stretched, like the hallway was warping at the edges. I blinked hard, telling myself I was tired, hallucinating, imagining things the way people do in places they don't trust. But then the hum broke, cracked, split open. A whisper slid down the corridor. Not a word, just a shape of sound, high, thin, trembling, like something learning how to speak by listening to humans scream. My mind told me to run. My legs refused. Because fear doesn't obey logic, it obeys memory. And something deep inside me, some buried instinct left over from childhood desert nights, recognized that whisper. Not the sound itself, but the wrongness of it, the way it carried, the way it felt familiar, the way it hooked into your spine and made your thoughts slow, thick, muddy. Something in that hallway wanted me to listen. I took one step back, then another. My boots scraped across the peeling carpet. The whisper followed, not in the air, not in the space around me, but inside my hearing, like it had bypassed my ears and slid straight into my mind. It stretched itself thin, elongated, as if matching my retreating steps, a mimicry of motion. When my back hit the cold metal rail beside the stairwell, the whisper stopped. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was loaded, trembling, like the absence of sound was just another voice, waiting its turn. Then, far below me, from the lobby or maybe the parking lot, came a long, low moan. I froze. It rose slowly, not like a person crying out, but like something waking up, like air being dragged through the wrong-sized lungs. It was wet, heavy. It reverberated against the motel's thin walls until it felt like the whole building was vibrating. The sound shivered through me, hollow and deep. A warning, a calling. I couldn't tell which. That was when every door in the hallway, every single one except mine, shifted, not open, not closed, just shifted. A subtle, unnatural click, like unseen hands had tested each handle at the same time. I didn't think. I bolted. My boots slammed against the carpet as I sprinted toward my room. I didn't look to see if anything followed. Fear gives you blinders. Everything narrows to escape, to survival, to the door that stands between you and whatever the night is becoming. I reached room 27, shoved the key into the lock, nearly dropping it twice because my fingers had gone numb and stupid. The door jammed halfway, like something leaned against it from the inside, and for one terrible second, I thought the manager had given me a room already occupied. I threw my shoulder into it. The door swung open. I slammed it shut behind me and locked the deadbolt, the chain, the handle. Then I backed away, chest heaving, throat tight, eyes locked on the door as if staring was the only thing holding it in place. The room felt different, colder, darker, as if something outside had seeped under the threshold and crawled into the corners. The heater rattled weakly, blowing out nothing but lukewarm air. The shadows seemed longer, stretching toward the bed, and the buzzing from the lights overhead felt too low, like it was happening inside my bones. I told myself to breathe. I told myself to think. I told myself this was fear creating patterns that weren't there. But then the door handle nudged, not violently, just enough to make the metal click. I didn't move. The handle turned again, slowly testing the lock the way a stranger does when they're not sure which room they're supposed to enter. But there was no footstep on the other side. No breathing. Nothing human. The handle twitched once more before going still. My mouth went dry. I backed into the far corner of the room, pressing my shoulder blades against the wallpaper. I waited for the knock that usually follows a door handle test. That's the pattern of human behavior. Handle. Knock. Explanation. Wrong room. Sorry, my mistake. But this wasn't human, because instead of a knock, something pressed its weight against the door. The hinges creaked, the deadbolt bowed, the chains stretched taut as if the wood itself was being persuaded to forget it was solid. A low, rasping exhale seeped through the cracks like someone breathing inches from the frame. Someone without warmth, without lungs that worked the way lungs should. I don't remember deciding to move. I just found myself crouched beside the bed, gripping my phone so tightly my hand hurt. I dialed the front desk. The manager answered on the first ring, his voice barely above a whisper. "Stay in your room." "There's something," I started, but he cut me off. "Do not open the door," he said sharply, like he had said those words thousands of times and night after night they were ignored. No matter what you hear, no matter what it says, do not open it. Then he hung up. I lowered the phone, my breath shaking uncontrollably. No matter what it says. The thought wedged itself in my skull. Why would he say that? Why specify says? Unless something here had tried speaking to people before. A soft knock echoed through the room. 3 taps. I jolted, heart slamming against my ribs. Then came a voice on the other side of the door. It was mine. "Evan, open the door." My chest seized. My ears went hot. I stared at the door handle as if the metal might melt. The voice repeated, same tone, same breathing, same pattern. My voice, perfectly copied. "Evan, let me in." A shiver crawled up my spine so violently my teeth clicked together. I tried to speak, but fear made my throat collapse. I shook my head even though I knew it couldn't see me. Knew it wasn't looking through the peephole or the window or any crack in the frame. Whatever was outside didn't need eyes. The voice came again, softer, coaxing, almost gentle. "You're cold. Open the door." I pressed my palms against my ears. It didn't help. The voice wasn't traveling through the air. It was inside my head. "Open it, Evan. You don't have to be alone." My breathing turned shallow. My fingertips tingled. Dizziness blurred the edges of my vision. I could feel something pulling at my thoughts, unraveling my sense of time. Holbrook's silence pressed in like a hand over my mouth. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the voice stopped, and the hallway erupted with movement. Doors slamming, footsteps running, screams, dozens of them echoing from every direction, folding over each other until the sound became a choking, suffocating roar. But none of the screams belonged to anyone living. They sounded recorded, layered, replayed, as though the motel itself had been collecting them. I covered my ears, crouched low, squeezing my eyes shut. The floor vibrated, the windows shook, the heater screeched like metal tearing. The room's lights flickered so violently the world strobed. Then, a single, deafening bang against my door shook the entire frame. Then another, and then silence. Not natural silence, heavy, pressing, electric. A silence that felt like being watched by something bigger than the room, bigger than the building, bigger than any place I'd ever been. My breath stuttered, my eyes watered. I waited for the next sound. But what came wasn't sound, it was a feeling. A presence sliding away from the door, drifting down the hall, descending the stairs, moving back to whatever dark corner of Holbrook it had crawled out of. The quiet stretched minute by minute until I couldn't tell how long I'd been holding my breath. At dawn, I opened the door. The hallway was exactly as it had been hours earlier. Still, dusty, empty. No footprints, no signs of struggle, no bent doors, no shattered bulbs. But room 23, the one with the scraping, stood open. Its interior was completely empty. Bare drywall, no furniture, no carpet, no fixtures. A room removed from reality. I didn't check out. I didn't look for the manager. I didn't even go back for my receipt. I ran to my truck, started the engine, and drove until Holbrook disappeared in the mirrors. And even now, years later, every time I stop in a small-town motel, every time I hear footsteps in a hallway that should be empty, every time a voice calls through a door or a wall, I feel that same cold breath on my ribs. I learned something that night, something I wish I hadn't, something I carry with me in the quiet spaces between towns. Fear isn't the sound you hear, or the scream that wakes you, or the voice pretending to be yours. Fear is realizing the desert doesn't whisper to you, it whispers through you. And in Holbrook, something listened back. I've learned that some places don't wait for the night to become dangerous. They carry their darkness in the daylight, tucked into corners, stitched into the soil, waiting for someone careless enough to mistake quiet for safety. My name is Evan. I'm 34 years old, and I've been a long-haul truck driver for almost a decade now. I live just outside Flagstaff, Arizona, but the road feels more like home than any house I've ever slept in. And if I've learned anything from driving past all those forgotten towns, abandoned depots, and silent stretches of track that run beside the highways like scars, it's that some places remember what happened there. Some places hold on. Some places watch. What happened to me in Winslow back in May of 2022 still clings to me like dust I can't wash off. I don't tell this story because I want attention. I tell it because I still don't know what I saw. And because a part of me is scared that whatever walked those tracks that night wasn't meant to be seen by anyone still living. And maybe because I ignored every instinct I had, that quiet voice that always warns me when something feels wrong. I told myself the rational story instead. I convinced myself the strange sounds were just trains settling, metal cooling, wind pushing through old structures. But the truth is far worse. I wasn't alone out there. And I should have trusted myself long before it was too late. I remember the light that evening, how the sun dipped behind the low roofs of Winslow, casting those long shadows across the town like stretched out fingers. That fading orange glow always hits different in the small towns of northern Arizona, especially the ones built around the railroad. The tracks cut the town in half, a straight line dividing the familiar from the forgotten. And on the south side of Winslow, where the lights thin out and the buildings grow older, the tracks feel like a border between the present and something ancient that never fully left. I had pulled into Winslow to rest. I wasn't supposed to be on that side of town at all. The truck stop I planned to stay at was full, lined with rigs from out of state, drivers desperate for a place to sleep. I could have kept driving another hour, but fatigue was starting to lean heavy on my eyes, that dangerous drowsiness that creeps in without warning. So I parked near an old freight depot instead. It wasn't abandoned, not officially, but it might as well have been. No workers, no lights, just empty loading bays and graffiti-tagged walls. The kind of place people avoid after dark without being told why. Right away, the air felt wrong. Dry, still, but almost expectant, like the atmosphere before a storm, only heavier. My instincts whispered, find somewhere else, but my body ached and the sun was sinking, so I ignored the warning. I wish I hadn't. I decided to stretch my legs and walk toward the tracks to shake off the stiffness of the drive. It's something I always do before turning in. Walk a bit, breathe, clear my head. The gravel crunched under my boots, that familiar sound that usually comforts me. But that night it felt intrusive, too loud in a place that seemed to demand silence. From a distance, the tracks looked like they were pulling the last of the sunlight into themselves, as if the metal rails were swallowing the day. And behind the depot, where the earth sloped downward, shadows pooled like water. That's when I heard it. Not a train, not wind, a footstep. Slow, dragging, too deliberate. It came from the direction of the tracks. I stopped moving. My breath hitched. For a second, I told myself it was just someone else walking, maybe a local, maybe another traveler. But something in the rhythm felt off. The steps didn't match the natural sway of a human gait. They felt uneven, like whoever was out there wasn't used to walking anymore. The sound stopped as soon as I noticed it. I waited, listening. Silence pressed against me, thick and cold. Then, faintly, I heard a sound that made something inside me tighten, a shuffle, followed by a soft rhythmic tapping. Not metal, not wood, almost bone-like. A hollow click that echoed down the rails. I swallowed hard, feeling the dryness of my throat. I forced myself to step forward, telling myself I was overreacting, telling myself it was probably an animal, or someone working late, or a hitchhiker, anything normal. But the truth was already forming in the back of my mind, a truth I didn't want to admit. Whatever was making that sound wasn't trying to walk toward the tracks. It was walking on them. I reached the edge of the gravel where it met the rails. The sky had dimmed more than I realized. Dusk had dropped fast, painting the horizon in bruised purple. And far down the line, so far it was almost just a shape, I saw movement. Something was walking along the tracks. At first I thought it was a person, tall, thin, barely swaying. But the way it moved sent a cold ripple down my spine. The steps were too slow, too deliberate. The arms hung too long, the posture too stiff, and the head seemed wrong, tilted, almost listening. My heartbeat climbed into my throat. Every instinct begged me to step back, but I couldn't move. I watched, frozen, as the figure paused on the tracks. It didn't turn toward me, but I felt deep in my chest that it knew I was there. A freight horn sounded somewhere to the east, distant but steady. The vibration crawled up through the metal rails and into my boots. The figure didn't react, didn't flinch, didn't move at all. Then the clicking started again. Click, 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 slow, methodical, like bones knocking together. My breath trembled out of me. I glanced around, searching for someone else who might be seeing this. But the depot was empty. The street behind me was silent. The town beyond was settling into its evening calm. I looked back at the figure. It had moved, closer. Not by walking, but by being suddenly nearer, as if distance didn't behave normally around it. It still stood perfectly straight, head still tilted at that unbearable angle, arms hanging like dead weight. The air temperature dropped, sharp and sudden, brushing my skin with a cold that didn't belong in May. Goosebumps rose along my arms. The smell in the air changed too, earthy at first, then metallic, like rusted iron warmed by the day. I took a step back. My boot scraped gravel, and that sound, just that tiny sound, brought the figure to life. Its head snapped upright, not slowly, not naturally, a violent, jerking motion like a puppet yanked by invisible strings. My body reacted before my mind could catch up. I stumbled backward, breathing too fast, trying to get back to the truck. I didn't run, but my steps were frantic, clumsy. Behind me, I heard the sound I will never forget, a long, dragging exhale, like something waking up after a very long sleep. I forced myself not to look back. Not yet. Not until I reached the pavement. My hands shook as I fumbled for my keys, trying to convince myself I was just tired, hallucinating shadows in the dusk. But then another sound rose behind me, one that froze me mid-step. A second set of footsteps. Faster this time. Not dragging. Following. The moment those footsteps picked up behind me, my entire body flooded with a cold animal panic. Instinct, pure and simple. The kind that overrides logic and memory and reason. I didn't turn around. Not at first. Something deep inside me whispered that if I looked too soon, I'd see it closer than it had any right to be. The pavement under my boots felt uneven, warped, as if the world behind me was bending things out of shape. My breath hitched. My hands trembled harder. I could hear my keys clinking together as I walked, too loud in the quiet, too sharp against the stillness. The footsteps kept coming. Fast. Off rhythm. like a human trying to mimic a sprint but forgetting how legs should move. That was the moment my mind broke through the fear long enough to think, if it catches me out here, alone, I won't make it to the truck in time. So I turned. And what I saw, it wasn't running. Not really. It moved in a way I still struggle to describe. It leaned forward as though its upper body was leading its lower half, and the legs followed too quickly, snapping almost like they were reacting late to invisible commands. Its arms didn't swing. They didn't do anything. They just hung stiff and limp, even as the creature or person or whatever it was raced down the gravel toward me. But the worst part, the part that still wakes me up at night, its feet weren't landing on the ground the way they should. Each step missed the earth by an inch or two, like it was walking on something I couldn't see. My body moved before my thoughts caught up. I bolted. I ran harder than I've ever run in my life, boots scraping on asphalt, lungs burning, vision narrowing. I didn't dare look back. I kept my eyes locked on the familiar outline of my truck. A safe place, a metal shell, a door I could slam shut between me and whatever was closing in behind me. But even as I ran, I felt the air changing again, growing colder, heavier, pressing into my lungs like a weight. And I heard that sound rise behind me, echoing across the empty freight yard. That long, hollow exhale, a sound like something learning how to breathe again. I threw my weight forward, forcing my legs to move faster. Every worst-case scenario flashed through my mind, falling, tripping, my boots catching on broken pavement. And then another sound joined the exhale, a faint rattle. Metal. Chain. Something dragging loosely with each step. The kind of sound you hear in horror movies, but this wasn't a movie. This wasn't scripted. This was real. Too real. The time I reached my truck, my hands were shaking so violently, I dropped the keys. They clattered to the pavement, bouncing once, twice, before settling by my boot. I bent to grab them, and that was when a cold rush of air brushed the back of my neck. It wasn't wind. It was breath. I froze, hunched over, one hand on my keys, the other braced on my knee. Every muscle screamed at me not to turn around. But fear and instinct aren't always aligned. I looked. The figure stood not 3 feet behind me. Silent, still, towering. Its head was tilted again, but differently this time, closer to curious than listening. In the darkness, its outline looked stretched, like the night itself was clinging to its limbs. I didn't see its face. I couldn't. Its features were swallowed in shadow, as if light refused to touch it. But I felt its attention, like static, crawling under my skin. My breath quivered out of me. I straightened slowly, clutching the keys so tightly they dug into my palm. Then it moved, not toward me, but sideways, emotions so smooth and unnatural it looked like it was sliding rather than stepping. Its feet didn't seem to push off the ground. The legs didn't bend. It simply shifted, drifting across the pavement in an arc, circling me, cutting off my path back to the road. And in the silence, I heard that tapping again. Click. 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 Not from its hands, not from its feet, from its chest. Like something inside it was knocking, trying to get out. My mind struggled to rationalize it. A person with some kind of deformity? A drug user? Disoriented, aggressive? But nothing fit. No human moved like that. No human breathed like that. No human made the air temperature drop around them like stepping into an industrial freezer. And then, just when I thought it was going to rush me, it stopped. Its head snapped upward, twisting toward the tracks. Not slowly, not naturally. That same puppet-like jerk that made every nerve in my body scream. A train horn sounded again, miles away. But this time, the figure reacted. Its chest heaved once, sharply. That internal clicking grew louder, faster, matching the distant rumble on the horizon. My heart pounded against my ribs, each beat like a scream trapped inside me. The thing pivoted toward the tracks, its body turning stiffly like its joints were frozen. For a brief second, I thought it was leaving, and that's when it spoke. Not words, not a voice, a sound, low, vibrating, broken, a moan that wasn't human in tone or rhythm, a sound that felt like grief and anger and hunger all tangled together. It took a single step toward the tracks, then another. Then It vanished, not in a flash, not in smoke, not into the shadows. It vanished as though it had never existed, dissolving into the thinning light like a reflection wiped clean from glass. My knees buckled. I fell against the side of my truck, chest heaving, eyes locked on the now empty stretch of pavement where it had stood. My mind scrambled for a logical explanation, but there was nothing logical about what I'd seen. Nothing rational about the cold still clinging to my skin. I scrambled into the truck, slamming the door, locking it twice. My hands shook so violently I could barely jam the key into the ignition. When the engine finally roared to life, the sound flooded me with relief, so powerful I almost cried. But when I put the truck in gear, something hit the side of my cab. Hard, a single strike, like a hand or something larger. Then came the tapping. Click, click, click. Right behind my head, I floored it. The truck lurched forward, tires skidding over gravel, the entire rig shaking as I tore out of that freight yard. I didn't look back. Not once. Not even when the tapping continued for several seconds, echoing through the frame of the cab like a heartbeat out of sync with my own. When I finally hit the highway, sweat soaked my shirt. My pulse hammered in my ears. The world ahead of me looked warped by tears I didn't remember letting fall. But the worst part wasn't what I escaped. It was what I saw when I glanced in the side mirror as I sped east out of Winslow. Far behind me, by the edge of the tracks, something stood in the middle of the rails, tall and still, watching my taillights fade. And as the distance stretched and the darkness swallowed the town, I could have sworn its head tilted again. Listening. I drove for what felt like hours, though in reality, it was probably only 20 or 30 minutes. The night pressing in around me as though the darkness itself wanted to pull me back toward those tracks. Every mile I put between myself and Winslow made my skin crawl, like invisible fingers dragging along my spine, whispering that I hadn't escaped, that it was still there, waiting. I finally pulled into a well-lit truck stop outside Holbrook, heart hammering, hands trembling. I parked in a corner stall, far from any other trucks, the lights flickering above like a bad omen. I stayed in the cab for a long time, just breathing, listening for sounds that didn't exist, the dragging, the clicking, the slow exhale that haunted me. My chest ached, my legs were numb, my mind refused to process fully what had happened. Sleep didn't come, not that night, not for days afterward. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the shadow on the tracks, felt its presence circling me, felt that impossible tilt of the head, the unnatural way it moved, the sound of bones or metal or something else entirely knocking together inside its chest. I replayed everything in my mind, obsessively analyzing each detail, trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was a hallucination, a product of fatigue. Maybe I'd glimpsed some disturbed human, a drifter with severe deformities. But the cold, the way the air pressed in on me, the sound of something vanishing that shouldn't have, nothing explained that. My rational mind failed me where instinct had warned me, and instinct had been right. After a night of staring at the ceiling and gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white, I decided I couldn't ignore what I'd felt, what I'd seen. I couldn't pretend Winslow was just a sleepy town, or that those tracks were ordinary. I needed to know. I needed to understand what that thing was, or at least find some evidence that I hadn't completely lost my mind. The next day, I drove back to Winslow, careful to arrive during daylight this time. The town looked harmless in the sun. The streets were quiet but normal. Children rode bicycles, people waved as I passed. Even the old freight depot, the scene of my terror, looked abandoned but innocent under the bright, unforgiving light. Nothing suggested it had been home to something that defied natural laws the night before. I parked near the depot and cautiously approached the tracks. My heart thudded painfully in my chest, every nerve screaming in protest. I ran my hands along the rails, listened to the echoes of my own breathing, but there was nothing. No signs of footprints in the gravel, no scrap of fabric, no clue that something had walked there, that something had been watching me. The world looked ordinary, far too ordinary, and that made my skin crawl even more. I followed the tracks, tracing them through the southern edge of town, hoping for anything, a clue, a trace, an explanation. That's when I noticed it, the smell. Faint, but unmistakable. Earthy, metallic, warm, decayed. I gagged slightly, realizing that smell was lingering along a curve in the tracks that had been directly behind me the night I fled. I crouched down, examining the gravel. There were depressions, not deep, not obvious, but irregular, spaced in a way that couldn't belong to a normal person. Long, uneven, dragging slightly, as if the ground had been marked by something tall, something that didn't quite step normally. I wanted to turn away, to flee again, but part of me, the part that hated uncertainty, that craved answers, forced me to continue. I followed the tracks beyond the town limits, into the scrubland where the trees thickened and the desert seemed to hold its breath. The air changed here too, colder, heavier, almost damp despite the dry heat of the day. Every step I took felt like stepping into the memory of the night before, like the world remembered what had happened. And then I saw it. Not the figure, not the shadow, not the thing itself, a mark in the earth. A perfect deep groove in the dirt, like a rail, had been dragged sideways for hundreds of feet. The vegetation around it was flattened, broken in ways nothing human could have done. I traced the line with my eyes as it disappeared into the distant trees. My stomach churned. The evidence was small, subtle, almost dismissible, but it was enough. Enough to tell me that I hadn't imagined it. Enough to tell me that something had walked the tracks that night, something unnatural, and that it had continued onward beyond what I could see. The memory of the sound, clicking, dragging, exhaling, returned. My pulse jumped. Every instinct in me screamed that I should leave, yet my feet were glued to the earth. I realized something essential. The fear I had felt wasn't just fear of being caught or attacked. It was the fear of understanding too much, of realizing that the world has layers we weren't meant to penetrate. And sometimes the ordinary world is a thin mask over something older, something patient, something that watches. I turned back toward the depot, back toward the town, feeling the sun's warmth dim in the afternoon. Every shadow seemed sharper, every crack in the pavement a doorway to that night. I got into my truck and sat for a long time, engine idling, staring at the horizon. I didn't see it again. Not that day. I don't know if I ever will. But I learned something essential in those hours and days afterward. I learned to listen to that quiet voice inside, the one that tells you to leave, to trust the instinct that warns you when something isn't right. I learned that some places carry memory in ways we can't fully comprehend, and some shadows walk freely in the spaces we assume are empty. And I learned, most painfully, that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the willingness to face it, to survive it, and to carry the story forward so that the fear can teach rather than consume. Even now, when I drive past Winslow on my long hauls, I find my gaze drawn to the tracks. I slow down instinctively, remembering the smell, the sound, the cold. I don't look for the shadow anymore, not consciously. I know it's there, somewhere in the corners of perception, between the steel rails and the desert scrub. And I know that the memory of that night will never fully leave me. What I want people to understand, those who will hear this story, is that fear isn't always a monster that attacks you directly. Sometimes it's a quiet presence, a shadow walking just behind you, testing the edges of your perception, reminding you of your own vulnerability. It's slow, it's patient, and it doesn't always need to be violent to be terrifying. I still carry that fear with me, like a reminder stitched into my chest, but I carry it with knowledge now. Knowledge that even the most ordinary places can hide the extraordinary. Even the sunniest day can harbor darkness, and that listening to your instincts, honoring them, is sometimes the only thing that keeps you alive. Fear is not weakness. Fear is awareness, and awareness properly harnessed can save you. When I finally recount that night, when I finally tell the story of the shadow on the tracks, I'm not just sharing a tale of terror. I'm sharing a warning, a lesson, a call to pay attention to the whispers of the world around you, the subtle shifts in light, temperature, sound, and sensation that signal the presence of something you cannot name. a reminder that some truths are hidden in plain sight, carried in silence, stalking the edges of your understanding. I never returned to that section of the tracks after that second visit, but I carry it in my mind, always. And whenever I drive past Winslow, a part of me tightens in anticipation, not of seeing the figure again, but of acknowledging it, of respecting it, of remembering that some places don't forgive intrusion lightly. It changed me. It made me more cautious, yes, but also more alive, more aware, more humble. I realized that the road teaches you things that home never can, that some fears are not meant to be conquered. They are meant to guide you, shape you, warn you. And somewhere out there, along the tracks in Winslow, the shadow walks still, listening, waiting, patient, silent. And maybe, just maybe, it knows you are watching even if you think you aren't. And that's the part that lingers most, the knowledge that some darkness doesn't vanish. It only waits for the next person, foolish or brave enough to walk near it, to hear it breathe, to feel it close without ever fully understanding what it is. That night, that May in 2022, I didn't just see something unnatural. I learned that fear, when faced directly, when survived, can teach you more than safety ever will. And even now, after all these months, I carry that lesson in the deepest part of me. The world is wider than you imagine, stranger than you allow yourself to believe, and sometimes in the quietest, most ordinary places, the shadows are already walking. I tell this not to scare you, but to remind you. To remind anyone who listens. Trust your instincts. Pay attention to the small things. Respect the silence. Because sometimes the ordinary is only a mask, and behind it, the extraordinary is already moving. And in Winslow on those tracks, the shadow walks still. The night I learned what real fear feels like wasn't loud or violent. It didn't begin with screaming or headlights or anything dramatic. It started with a quiet breath, my own, fogging up the inside of my windshield as the desert stretched empty in every direction, and my mind whispered the first tiny doubt that something wasn't right. My name is Caleb Turner. I'm 43 years old, and I've been a long-haul truck driver for nearly half my life. I live in Flagstaff, Arizona, a place I love but rarely see, because the road owns most of my days and a good chunk of my nights. In July of 2020, when everything in the world felt tense and uncertain, I took a last-minute run down old Route 66 toward Kingman. I've driven that stretch hundreds of times, dust, heat, and long, hypnotic asphalt, but that night carved itself into my memory like a scar. People think truckers get used to the quiet, but the truth is the quiet gets inside you. It becomes a companion you never invited. And sometimes when you're tired enough, stressed enough, or alone enough, the quiet starts to move, like it has its own pulse, its own intentions. That night, the silence felt heavier than usual. The sky was clear, the stars bright, but the air was unusually still. Even the wind turbines weren't spinning. I remember turning down the radio because it suddenly felt too intrusive, too artificial for the dead calm outside. I wanted to listen. To what? I didn't know. I just felt this weird pressure in my chest telling me to pay attention. I told myself it was nothing. I always do. That's the dilemma I carry. I don't trust my instincts. Never have. My dad raised me to be logical, to be a man who doesn't jump at shadows, and somewhere along the way, those words turned into chains. Every time I felt something, intuition, warning, a prickling at the back of my neck, I swallowed it, forcing myself to be rational, to be steady. But steady almost got me killed that night. I was about 15 miles outside Kingman when I saw her. A lone figure on the shoulder, just barely caught by my headlights. At first I thought it was my eyes playing tricks because she looked too still, like she'd been carved out of the darkness rather than standing in it. She wore denim shorts, a faded black t-shirt, and a backpack slung loosely over one shoulder. Her hair was tangled, blowing slightly even though there was no wind. I slowed instinctively, then cursed myself for it. You're not supposed to pick up hitchhikers, not in the desert, not at night, not when you don't know what desperation can turn someone into. But the road was dead. and she looked young, maybe mid-20s. Something about the way she stood, like she was trying not to look afraid, hit me harder than it should have. I checked my mirrors, rolled down the passenger window just a crack, and leaned toward it. "You all right?" I called out. She stepped closer, but not too close, and for a split second I thought I saw relief wash over her face. "I need to get into Kingman," she said. "Please. I've been out here a while." Her voice was soft but steady. No slurring, no aggression, no obvious red flags. Still, something kept tugging at the back of my mind, an unease I tried to ignore. "Fine," I said finally. "Hop in. I'll take you into town." When she climbed into the cab, the air inside shifted. Not colder, not warmer, just different, the way a room feels after someone argues inside it. Something unseen hanging in the space between us. I told myself I was tired, overthinking, being dramatic. I forced a calm breath and put the truck back in gear. She buckled her seatbelt and stared straight ahead. No small talk, no explanation, just rigid, like she was bracing for something. After a minute, I said, "Name's Caleb." She hesitated before answering. "Lena." Most hitchhikers overshare to make the ride less tense, but not her. She didn't ask my destination or why I was out so late. She didn't look around the cab or check her phone. She just sat there, hands clasped tight in her lap, thumbs rubbing anxiously against each other. "You stranded?" I asked. She nodded but kept her eyes on the road. "What happened?" "Car trouble," she said quietly. "Back there." She gestured behind us but didn't turn to look. I glanced in the mirrors, expecting to see a vehicle on the shoulder, a stalled SUV, or maybe some hazard lights blinking in the distance. There was nothing. No car, no tire tracks, no debris, no sign anyone had been there. The desert, wide and open under the moonlight, lay completely undisturbed. I swallowed, the back of my throat suddenly dry. "How far back?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't know." That was the moment something cold crawled up my spine. Not fear exactly, more like realization. Like my instincts were finally waking up after years of neglect, banging on the inside of my skull, begging me to pay attention. But I pushed those warnings down, like always. I told myself it didn't matter where her car was. People panic. People walk further than they realize. People get disoriented in the desert. Nothing strange about that. But then the smell hit me. A faint sweetness at first, something floral, lavender maybe, but underneath it was something sour, damp, earthy, like clothes that had been soaked and left to rot. It wasn't overpowering, but it was wrong, out of place in the sterile, dry Arizona night. I glanced over again. She hadn't moved, still staring straight ahead. "You okay?" I asked. "Yes." Her tone was flat, emotionless. I tried again. "You from around here?" This time she turned her head slowly toward me, and I realized something I hadn't noticed before. Her eyes looked swollen, red around the rims, like she'd been crying for hours. "Not anymore," she said. Another chill. I tried to steady my breathing, keep my voice casual. The road stretched ahead in a long, lonely ribbon, the kind of stretch where you feel like the world is shrinking into the beam of your headlights. "Where exactly do you need to be in Kingman?" I asked. She didn't answer. She was staring at the windshield again, but her expression shifted. Her shoulders tensed, her fingers clenched into fists. "Are you scared of something?" I asked gently. Her voice cracked. "I don't want him to find me." My hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Who?" She didn't speak. Instead, she turned and looked out her window like she was afraid to say his name aloud. And just as I opened my mouth to ask again, she whispered, "He's following us." I whipped my eyes toward the mirrors. Nothing. The desert behind us was pitch black, broken only by the fading glow of starlight on the asphalt. No other headlights, no dust clouds, no shadows moving. "There's no one there," I said firmly. "You're safe. You're in my truck. Nobody's—" "Not on the road," she whispered. "He doesn't need the road." My heart pounded so violently I felt it in my teeth. I forced out a shaky breath and tried to stay rational, tried to be that steady man my father demanded I be. But every instinct I'd ever ignored was screaming now. I opened my mouth to ask what she meant, but she was gone. just gone. 1 second, sitting beside me. The next, the passenger seat was completely empty. The moment I realized she had vanished mid-sentence, my hands jerked on the steering wheel, and the truck swerved hard onto the rumble strip. The whole cab vibrated with that low, punishing shudder as gravel spat out from under the tires. My breath jammed in my throat. I slammed the brakes, fought the wheel, and brought the truck to a skidding stop on the side of the empty highway. For a long second, all I could hear was my heartbeat hammering in my ears. My chest felt tight, too tight, like the air inside the cab had thickened into something I wasn't meant to breathe. I turned slowly, every nerve in my body resisting the truth I already felt. The passenger seat was still empty. The indentation from her weight was gone. The seatbelt she had pulled across her chest now hung slack beside the door. There was no trace of her. Nothing. Not a strand of hair, not a smudge on the window, not the lingering warmth of a body having just sat there, but the smell remained. That same faint lavender mixed with something damp and rotten clung to the air like a ghost of her presence. It was the only thing confirming she'd ever been there at all. "Lena?" I whispered, my voice cracking. My own words sounded foreign, too loud in the suffocating stillness. I checked the sleeper compartment behind me, even though I knew damn well no one had climbed back there. I swept the beam of my phone flashlight across the mattress, the storage bins, the dark corners. Nothing moved. Nothing stirred. The cab remained dead still. "Okay," I muttered to myself, trying to steady my breathing. "You're tired. You're exhausted. You're making connections that aren't there." But the lie tasted bitter. I looked out through the windshield. The desert lay motionless in every direction, huge and empty beneath the pale July moon. I'd pulled over beside a shallow wash, a dry ditch of sand and scrub that carved a jagged line parallel to the highway. Something about that ditch bothered me. It was too dark, too quiet, as if it absorbed sound instead of reflecting it. I killed the engine. The hum died. Silence took its place, and that's when I heard it. A single knock, not on the truck, not on the road, from outside, down in the ditch. I froze. The knock came again, soft, deliberate, rhythmic, almost polite, like someone tapping gently on a door they didn't want to break but fully intended to open. My mouth went dry. Logic snapped like a brittle twig inside my mind, because no matter how hard I tried to rationalize it, I knew that knock wasn't something I imagined. Sound has a weight to it when it's real, a vibration that travels through the body, and that knock carried weight. "Lena?" I forced out, even though I didn't want an answer. Silence. Then the knock came again. 3 taps this time. Something in the pattern felt familiar, unsettling, like a memory trying to claw its way back into consciousness. I swallowed hard, cracked open my door, and immediately hesitated. The night air was colder than it had any right to be. Route 66 in July should have been a furnace, even after midnight, but the chill that hit my face felt unnatural, damp, and heavy, like stepping into a cellar that hadn't seen sunlight in decades. I stepped down from the cab, boots crunching on gravel. My flashlight beam swept over the ground, lighting up dust particles that twisted unnaturally like they were drifting against the wind. Another knock, this time closer. From the ditch. I raised the flashlight. The beam fell across the wash, and there she was. Lena, standing ankle-deep in the dry sand, her arms hanging limp by her sides, her head tilted slightly like she was listening to something only she could hear. Her hair dark, tangled, hung over part of her face. Her clothes looked the same, but her skin looked wrong, pale, too pale, like it had been drained of something essential. "Lena," I whispered, "Jesus, how did you get down there?" She didn't respond, didn't blink, didn't even breathe, not that I could see. I took a shaky step closer to the guardrail, but didn't cross it. "Are you hurt?" I asked, louder this time. Her head moved the slightest fraction, a slow, unnatural jerk, as if someone were pushing her body from the inside. Her eyes fixed on me. They looked emptier than before, deeper. The kind of eyes that held things no living person should ever have to carry. I clenched the guardrail hard enough for the metal to dig into my palms. Part of me wanted to run back to the truck, slam the door, and floor it. Another part felt anchored, rooted to the spot by something I couldn't explain. "Who's following you?" I managed to ask. At the mention of him, something shifted in her expression. Not fear, something closer to resignation. The slightest tremor passed through her body. Then she lifted her hand. Just one shaking finger pointing behind me. The desert went silent. The kind of silence that doesn't belong in this world, like the land itself was holding its breath. My stomach dropped. Every hair on my neck rose. I turned slowly, flashlight beam quivering in my hand. There was nothing behind me. Nothing on the road, nothing in the open desert. But the smell hit me again, stronger this time. That rotten dampness, like earth overturned after a flood. It came from everywhere and nowhere. I whipped the light back toward the ditch. Lena was gone again. I stumbled backward in shock, my shoulder slamming into the side of my truck. The flashlight rattled in my grip. No, I gasped, scanning frantically. The ditch was empty, just dry sand. My pulse throbbed in my throat. I scrambled into the truck, slammed the door, and locked it twice. My breath fogged the windshield in frantic bursts. My hands shook so badly I could barely jam the keys into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I peeled away from the shoulder, tires spitting gravel and a spray behind me. The cab lurched forward as I accelerated too fast, the highway unspooling in front of me like a dark ribbon, pulling me away from something I didn't want to understand. But halfway down the road, something made me look at the passenger seat again. And there she was, sitting exactly where she had before. Seatbelt buckled, hands in her lap, staring straight ahead as if she'd never left. My scream got stuck somewhere behind my teeth. I couldn't force it out, couldn't breathe, couldn't think. She didn't look at me, didn't react. But her lips moved ever so slightly, a whisper. I leaned in before I realized what I was doing, drawn in like a moth to flame. "Please don't stop again," she breathed. I jerked back, heart hammering. "Lena, what's happening to you? What's happening to me?" She didn't answer. Instead, her gaze shifted to the side mirror, slowly, fearfully. I knew I shouldn't look. I knew, deep in my bones, that whatever was behind us wasn't meant for human eyes. But fear has a strange gravity. It pulls you in even when you fight it. My eyes flicked to the mirror. At first, it reflected only darkness. Then a shape emerged. A tall, distorted silhouette running along the ditch, running impossibly fast, its limbs bent in ways no human limbs could move, keeping pace with my speeding truck effortlessly as if it were gliding. I choked on my own breath. "What? What is that?" Lena squeezed her eyes shut. "He found me." "Who is he?" I shouted. The thing in the mirror twisted, its form almost flickering, like reality couldn't decide what it was supposed to look like. A long arm extended, fingers reaching outward, stretching far too far, brushing the air as though trying to grab the back of the trailer. Then, the knocking started again. Not from the ditch this time, from underneath my truck, right below our feet. Slow, rhythmic, deliberate. Knock, knock, knock. Lena's voice broke into a sob. "Don't stop the truck, Caleb." I pressed the accelerator to the floor, but the knocking only grew louder, closer, more insistent. And the shape in the mirror leaned forward, its stretched face turning toward me, even though it had no features I could recognize. It felt like it was looking directly into me, seeing every fear I'd ever buried. My instincts screamed at me to run, but the road ahead was disappearing into a blur, and my throat tightened with a thought I couldn't escape. What if I couldn't outrun it? What if it wanted me too? I kept my foot crushed against the accelerator, but the truck felt sluggish, like something enormous had latched onto the trailer and was dragging it backward. The RPM climbed, the engine roared, yet the speedometer dropped by a hair, the needle trembling as if something unseen was fighting me for control of the road itself. "Caleb," Lena whispered, trembling. "He's getting closer." I didn't know what to say. My throat felt closed off, tight as a fist. I couldn't blink. I couldn't look away from the road or the mirror, because every time my eyes shifted, the world seemed to distort in tiny, unsettling ways. The white lines on the asphalt blurred. The moon grew dim. The desert on either side of us looked stretched, warped, like fabric pulled too tight. The knocking from beneath the truck changed tempo, still deliberate but heavier. More force behind each hit, like a fist with weight. Depth, hunger. Knock, knock, knock. Please, I choked out, tell me what he is. Lena kept her eyes squeezed shut. He doesn't have a name you can speak. That's not an answer. Her breath trembled as she whispered, he follows the ones who die on the road. I jerked my head toward her. The words didn't fully register at first. Die on the road? Lena, what are you talking about? You're alive. I picked you up. She didn't open her eyes. I was alive, once. The temperature inside the cab dropped so sharply I felt my whole body shiver. The windshield fogged instantly. My exhale came out in a pale mist. My fingers stiffened on the steering wheel. No, I said, shaking my head violently. No, you were here. You spoke to me. You got in my truck. You were down in the ditch. I saw you. You didn't see me, she whispered. You saw what's left of me. The knocking turned into scraping, metal on metal, right under the floorboards. A hideous dragging sound that made my bones vibrate. I swallowed, hard. The taste of fear was metallic in the back of my throat. Lena, I said, my voice trembling despite everything I tried to hold steady. Why me? Why did you come to me? She finally opened her eyes, and the depth in them was enough to break something inside me. They weren't lifeless, not exactly, but they held a pain so vast it didn't look human anymore. I didn't choose you, she said softly. I was trying to get away. I thought if I could reach the road, if I could reach anyone, maybe he wouldn't drag me back. Her whole body shook. But he always comes. My mind reeled. I couldn't make sense of it. Couldn't reconcile the girl I'd seen with the words she spoke. But the weight in her voice, the resignation, told me she was speaking a truth from somewhere beyond my understanding. The scraping suddenly stopped. A silence settled under us, thick, expectant. I knew without any logic or explanation that silence was worse. The thing outside was no longer beneath the truck. It was somewhere else. My pulse thrashed in my ears, my throat closed. My grip tightened on the wheel until my hands ached. Then the side mirror darkened. Not like a shadow passing over it, like something pressed right up against the glass. A shape, a smear of darkness, a suggestion of a face that had no form, something that didn't belong to flesh or bone or anything that had ever been human. Don't look at it, Lena whispered, voice cracking. I already am, I whispered back, unable to tear my gaze away. And then it moved. Not with speed, with intention. The silhouette in the mirror leaned closer, its featureless surface stretching, bending as though drawn by curiosity or hunger. The mirror vibrated. Tiny fractures spidered across the glass. That snapped me out of it. I jerked my eyes away and focused on the road. I can't outrun him, I said, panic rising like a tide. What does he want? What is he trying to do? He wants me, Lena whispered, and if you stop the truck, he'll take you too. My stomach twisted. Then what do I do? Keep driving. For how long? She didn't answer. The mirror crackled again, this time with a sound like wet fabric tearing. Then came the voice. It started as a distant vibration, like the rumble of an oncoming storm. Then it sharpened, climbed, formed into something almost human. A low, distorted whisper that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Stop. My vision tunneled. The word filled the cab. It pressed against my skull. It felt like a set of fingers brushing along the back of my neck. I gritted my teeth, trying not to lose control. The truck swayed dangerously from side to side. The road ahead wavered. Caleb, Lena said weakly, please don't listen to him. But the voice came again, louder, sharper, more insistent. Stop! I slammed my hand against the dashboard and roared, I'm not stopping! The cab shuddered violently. The whole truck lurched as something struck the back of the trailer so hard the metal boomed like a drum. The force pushed us forward in a sickening jolt. I nearly lost control. He's angry, Lena whispered. He doesn't like when they fight. Good, I spat, though my body trembled. Let him be angry. But courage born from fear only lasts seconds. and the knocking, that slow, deliberate beating, returned, not from beneath, from inside the trailer, deep, echoing thuds that rattled through the frame. Knock, knock, knock. Something was in the cargo, pounding, pushing, trying to break through. My heart slammed against my ribs. My breath came in rapid, uneven bursts. "Lena," I said, my voice breaking, "I can't do this. I can't outrun something that isn't tied to the ground." Her voice was barely audible. "He's tied to me. Then what do I do?" She turned to me fully for the first time since she'd reappeared in the cab. Her expression was soft but filled with grief. "You have to let me go." I stared at her. "What are you talking about?" "If I'm with you, he comes for you. If I'm not, he'll leave you alone." I shook my head violently. "I'm not throwing you out. I'm not doing that." You wouldn't be throwing me out," she whispered. "I'm not really here." The world tightened around me. I felt tears sting the corners of my eyes. "I don't understand." "You don't have to." Lena reached out, slowly, like someone moving through water, and laid her cold hand over mine. The chill burned. "You just have to survive." The knocking from the trailer intensified, furious, pounding, relentless. The mirror fissured. The cab trembled. The air filled with the distorted whisper, "Stop, stop, stop." "I'll distract him," Lena whispered. "Just keep driving. Don't look back. Don't stop." Before I could react, before I could beg her not to do whatever she was about to do, her form flickered, like a candle flame caught in a gust, and vanished. The smell of lavender and rot disappeared with her. The trailer went silent. The mirror cleared. The voice faded to nothing. The road stretched ahead, quiet, empty, moonlit again. And for the first time since the nightmare began, I felt the truck accelerate freely under me. The weight holding it back was gone. I drove until the sky turned gray with dawn. My hands never relaxed. My breath never steadied. I didn't stop until the lights of Kingman appeared, dim but real, cutting through the early morning haze like salvation. I pulled into the first gas station I could find, turned off the engine, and sat there shaking until I could trust my legs again. When I finally stepped out, the warm desert air hit my face. It felt like waking up after being underwater too long. I checked the trailer. No dents, no scratches, no signs anything had ever touched it. But I know what happened. I know who I saw. And I know what followed us. People always talk about Route 66 like it's just a historic highway, an old American to nostalgia. But some parts of that road aren't meant for stories or photographs. Some parts are meant to be left alone. I never saw Lena again. But I still think about her, about the way she pointed behind me, the way she whispered warnings through tears, the way she sacrificed whatever was left of herself so I could keep driving. I don't know if she found peace. I don't know if she escaped him. I only know one thing. Every time I'm out on a dark highway and the night grows too quiet and the air shifts in that subtle, unnatural way, I keep driving, no matter what, because there are things on the road that don't want the living to stop, and I'm not ready to join them. The first thing I noticed was the silence, too heavy for a town that still had traffic lights blinking and storefronts glowing against the snow. My name is Aaron Holt. I was 36 that winter, running long-haul routes for a regional freight company based out of Flagstaff, Arizona. I'd been driving trucks for 12 years by then, long enough to believe that fear was just another road condition, like black ice or fog, that you learn to read, slow down for, and survive. I lived alone in a small rental on the east side of town, kept my circle small, my life simple. I trusted patterns, routes, schedules. The road made sense to me in ways people never quite did. December 2023 had already been brutal. Snowstorms stacking on top of each other, closures up on I-40, detours that turned 6-hour runs into 12. That night, I was hauling a half-empty refrigerated trailer northbound toward Utah, but a closure near the border forced me to divert through Williams. I hadn't planned to stop. I never planned to stop in small towns after dark. But fatigue has a way of rewriting your rules. The cold hit me the moment I cracked my door at the truck stop just off Route 66. Not the sharp, clean cold I was used to in the pines around Flagstaff. This was deeper, heavier, like the air itself had weight. It pushed into my lungs and stayed there. The kind of cold that doesn't sting right away, just quietly drains the warmth out of your bones. Snow was falling in soft, steady sheets, thick enough to blur distance and swallow sound. My boots crunched too loudly as I walked inside. The fluorescent lights hummed. A bell on the door rang with a brittle little sound that echoed longer than it should have. I remember thinking how empty it felt for a town so close to Christmas. Inside, it was warm but stale, the air thick with old coffee and fried food. The cashier barely looked up. I grabbed a thermos refill and a packaged sandwich I didn't really want. While I waited at the counter, I glanced at the small local TV mounted in the corner. The sound was low, but I could see the banner scrolling beneath the weather map. Winter storm advisory, snow accumulation unpredictable, and then a different image cut in briefly, street footage. A shaky frame of a downtown sidewalk. The text beneath it read, "Unconfirmed report, mysterious figure seen wandering at night." The feed switched back to weather before I caught anything else. I told myself it was nothing. Local fluff, social media nonsense. Every town had its share of rumors dressed up as news. Still, the image lingered. I went back out into the snow, climbed into the cab, and pulled onto the dark road toward downtown. The storm thickened fast. Snow clung to the windshield in wet, dragging streaks. My headlights tunneled through white. The hum of the engine and the steady slap of the wipers became the only sounds in the world. Williams at night is usually warm with neon, motels, diners, old Route 66 charm. That night, those lights felt distant, muted by the snow and the way it swallowed space. Stores were mostly closed. Street lamps cast pale halos that barely reached the ground before dissolving into drifting white. That's when I saw her. At first, I thought it was a reflection, a trick of light, a flare of color against the snow. But then she stepped fully into the beam of my headlights as I rolled through an empty intersection. She was standing on the corner, perfectly still. A red coat, not a jacket, not a hoodie, a long, old-fashioned coat that fell almost to her knees. The color was vivid, violent against the white world around her. The hood was up, shadowing her face. Snow collected on her shoulders and didn't seem to bother her at all. No gloves. I noticed that right away. Her hands were bare, hanging loosely at her sides, pale against the red fabric. I slowed without thinking. 20 tons of truck easing down to a crawl on a frozen road. My eyes kept searching her face for some sign of distress. Someone lost, drunk, hurt. She didn't move. The temperature gauge outside read 12 degrees. I rolled past her slowly, craning my neck to look back through the side mirror. She was still standing in the intersection, watching the truck disappear. I told myself what I always tell myself. Small town. Someone waiting for a ride. None of your business. 2 blocks later, I turned down a narrow street lined with dark houses and heavy snow-laden trees. I was heading for a quiet side road where truckers sometimes parked overnight. The snow muffled everything here. Even my engine sounded far away. And then I saw Red again. She was standing halfway down the same street. Closer now. Too close. My stomach tightened. The rational part of my brain started throwing out explanations as fast as it could. She'd crossed over. She lived here. Coincidence. Perfectly normal. But the timing felt wrong. The street was long. I hadn't turned for more than 10 seconds after passing her. She was facing me again. This time she lifted one hand. Not a wave, not a signal, just a slow, stiff movement upward, like she was testing whether her arm still worked. Cold crept into my chest. Not fear yet. Something quieter. A tension that settled behind my ribs and stayed there. I drove past her again. As I did, I glanced sideways, and for a fraction of a second, I thought I saw her face inside the hood. Her skin looked gray, not pale. Gray, like wet ash. Her eyes caught my headlights and reflected back wrong. Flat, dull, like glass that had lost its shine. The mirror showed empty street behind me. I parked 3 blocks later, backing the trailer into a space near an abandoned warehouse. I shut the engine off and let the silence rush in. The quiet was immediate and crushing. Snow drifted past my windshield in slow, soundless currents. My breath fogged the cab. I sat there with both hands wrapped around the warm thermos, trying to slow my heartbeat. I didn't tell myself ghost stories. I told myself about hypothermia, about small-town weirdness, about the way snow and shadows and exhaustion could twist your perception. I told myself I'd been driving too long. I climbed into the sleeper and tried to rest. That was my second mistake. Sometime after midnight, I woke to a sound that didn't belong to the storm. A knock. Not loud, not urgent, slow, hollow. 3 soft impacts spaced evenly apart. Knock, knock, knock. The sound traveled through metal and insulation and settled in my bones. For a moment, I didn't move. I just listened to the echo fade into the snowfall. No voices, no footsteps. The cold felt heavier now, as if the temperature had dropped inside the cab. My breath fogged thicker. I told myself not to look. I told myself it was snow sliding off the trailer. Someone passing by, an animal. The knock came again. Closer this time. On the driver's door. I slid forward from the sleeper seat by inch-long movements, every muscle tight. My hand hovered over the door handle. I could feel the vibration of the cold metal through the rubber grip. For reasons I still can't explain, the first thing I checked was the side mirror. Red filled the glass. She was standing so close to the door that I couldn't see her feet. The red coat pressed into the reflection, rippling slightly with the wind. Snow gathered on her hood and melted into dark, wet spots. Her face was turned toward the window. I couldn't see her eyes this time. Just the suggestion of a face behind shadowed glass, inches from mine. Another soft knock. Not with her knuckles, with her fingernails. A faint scraping followed, slow and deliberate. Tracing downward along the metal of my door. A sound like someone dragging brittle wires across ice. I didn't move. My body refused. My breath caught in my throat and stayed there, burning. Every instinct I had screamed to me not to open that door, not to speak, not to acknowledge what stood inches away from me. The scraping stopped. Seconds passed, then more. Finally, the mirror filled with drifting snow again. She was gone. I waited a full minute before I moved. Maybe more. Time had started to stretch in strange, uneven ways. I leaned forward and wiped the fog from the window with my sleeve. The street was empty. No footprints. No disturbance in the smooth surface of the snow beneath my door. Just the steady fall of white. I didn't sleep after that. I started the engine before dawn, hands shaking badly enough that I nearly dropped the keys. As the truck rumbled to life, I told myself the worst was over. Whatever fear had crawled into me during the night, it belonged to the dark. Daylight would burn it off like frost. The snow hadn't stopped when I pulled back onto the road. Driving out of Williams felt like moving through a tunnel made of silence. The town receded in pale shapes, roofs, trees, street signs muffled in white. I hadn't gone more than a mile when I noticed the tracks. Footprints. They ran parallel to the road, just beyond the tire marks, stretching out ahead of me as far as my headlights could reach. Long strides, bare feet. Red fibers were caught in the snow beside them, bright threads dragged from the hem of a coat. The road curved gently west. The footprints followed it. And somewhere ahead, just beyond where the headlights could reach, something moved. Just enough red to remind me I was not alone on that frozen stretch of road. The red flicker slipped out of sight around the curve, and I realized I'd been holding my breath hard enough to make my chest ache. I pressed the accelerator just a little, enough to keep moving, not enough to risk the ice. The truck's engine groaned in protest, the sound too loud in the sterile quiet of the snowbound world. The footprints stayed with me. They were wrong in a way I couldn't immediately explain. Too evenly spaced, too consistent. No hesitation, no sliding. No stumble. Anyone who had ever walked barefoot on frozen ground, even for a second, knew the body rebelled. Instinct forced you to flinch, to hop, to curse. These prints showed none of that, just steady, intentional movement. As the road climbed gently toward the pines, the tracks veered off the shoulder and disappeared into the untouched snow between the trees. I didn't slow down to look. By the time the sun began to thin the dark, I was miles outside of Williams. The sky turned from black to that washed-out steel blue that comes before real morning. Snow still fell, but lighter now, drifting instead of pouring. Only then did my pulse begin to settle. I told myself it was over. The rest of the drive passed without incident, but I carried the night with me like an extra weight behind my eyes. Every reflection in the windshield made me tense. Every red taillight in the distance made my chest tighten. When I finally dropped the trailer in Cedar City and headed back south, I found myself checking the weather far more often than I used to. I told myself I was just being careful. That was a lie. 2 weeks passed. I kept driving, kept running routes. The world returned to its familiar rhythm of asphalt and diesel and wait stations and shallow sleep in parking lots. But at night, alone in the bunk, I sometimes heard the echo of that fingernail scrape on metal. Sometimes I woke just before dawn with the certainty that something had been standing beside my door moments before. Then, 3 days before Christmas, I found her again. This time, it wasn't snowing. I was hauling a late run through northern Arizona, bound for a small distribution yard outside Oatman. The desert cold bit harder than the mountain chill, dry and merciless. The stars were sharp above the open road. Visibility was perfect, too perfect. I saw the red from over a quarter-mile away. She stood at the edge of the highway where the guardrail ended, beyond the reach of any streetlight. The red coat was unmistakable even at a distance, unnatural against the muted desert tones. My gut dropped with the certainty before my mind could argue. It was her. I slowed again, against my better judgment. As I approached, my headlights climbed her figure from the ground up, bare feet on asphalt, ankles thin and gray. The coat moved slightly in a breeze I couldn't feel from inside the cab. Her hood was down this time. The face beneath it made my hands go numb. The features were there, eyes, nose, mouth, but they were wrong in their proportions, stretched just enough to feel like a failed imitation of a human expression. Her lips parted as I rolled closer, but no breath fogged in the air. No sound came out. Just before I passed her, her head turned. Her eyes met mine. They were not empty. They were pleading and accusing. At the same time, the truck lurched as my foot hit the brake too hard. The trailer swayed, tires whining on cold pavement. In the mirror, I expected to see her crumpled on the road behind me. The space was empty. I pulled over a quarter-mile later, shaking so badly I had to brace my forearms against the steering wheel. I stayed there for a long time, engine idling, scanning both sides of the road until my eyes burned. Nothing moved but the desert wind. That night, sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that pleading, accusing stare. It dredged up something old in me, something I hadn't thought about in years. 8 years earlier, on a winter run through New Mexico, I'd passed a woman walking along the shoulder during a snowstorm. No jacket, no gloves. She'd been waving both arms, stumbling in the slush. I'd assumed she was drunk, or high, or someone else's problem. I'd told myself stopping on an icy shoulder at night was dangerous. By the time I'd convinced myself to turn around, she was gone. They found her body 2 days later in a drainage ditch. Hypothermia. That memory hit me now with a weight I wasn't prepared for. The guilt I'd buried under years of miles and noise and routine clawed its way back up. My chest tightened, not just with fear, but with recognition. I started to understand what my instincts had been whispering since Williams. This wasn't just about me. The reports began to surface more openly after Christmas. Local stations, social media clips, security camera footage no one could quite authenticate. The same story repeating in different towns across northern Arizona and southern Utah. A woman in a red coat, seen at night. Always alone, never speaking. Sometimes she vanished on camera mid-step. Sometimes she appeared where she couldn't possibly have reached in the time between sightings, and wherever she appeared, someone else disappeared soon after. A jogger found frozen near Page. A teenage driver who went off the road outside Kanab. An elderly man who wandered out of his house during a cold snap and never came back. The timeline twisted my stomach into something tight and ugly. I saw the pattern even when no one else wanted to. I stopped running night routes. I told my dispatcher it was fatigue, health, burnout. He didn't argue. Winter gave everyone an excuse. For a while, it worked. I drove in daylight, slept in populated lots, kept the fear wedged down where it wouldn't interfere with my hands on the wheel. Until February. Until I hit black ice outside of Flagstaff and jackknifed my rig across the right lane. The impact was loud, but mercifully shallow. I woke with my face pressed against the steering wheel and the taste of copper in my mouth. The world outside swam in bright white and flashing amber. The storm moved in fast while I waited for the tow. Snow buried the road again, and while I sat there strapped into the wreckage of my cab, dazed and shaking, I saw her standing at the tree line. The red coat glowed dully in the gathering dusk. This time, she walked toward me. Each step was slow, careful. The snow did not seem to resist her. My hands fumbled for the seatbelt release. My fingers were clumsy with cold and panic. I shouted into the empty storm without knowing what words came out. She reached the edge of the road and stopped. For the first time, her mouth moved with intent. "You finally stopped," she said. Her voice was dry, wind-burned. It sounded like it had traveled a very long way to reach me. "I couldn't help you," I whispered before I could stop myself. "I know," she said gently. "That's why I chose you." The cold inside the cab deepened. Frost crept along the edges of the shattered windshield in delicate filigree patterns. "I didn't mean to leave her," I said. "I was afraid." "So was I," the woman replied. She lifted her bare hand and placed it against the cracked glass. For a moment, our reflections overlapped, my living fear-stricken face, and behind it, the shape of someone who had never finished freezing. "I walk the roads where people choose not to stop," she said. "I follow the ones who looked away." My chest burned. The weight of every mile I'd ever driven, every shoulder I'd ever passed without slowing, pressed in on me at once. "I can't fix it," I said. "No," she agreed, "but you can remember us." Her hand slid down the glass, leaving no fog, no print. Behind her, the snow thickened into a white curtain, swallowing the trees and the road and the world itself. "What happens now?" I asked. She stepped back, her coat blended into the storm as if it had never been red at all. "You keep driving," her voice came softly, "but not the same way." The tow truck lights breached the white moments later. By the time the driver reached my door, there was no sign of her. No footprints, no red threads, no mark in the snow. I left trucking 3 months after that. Sold the rig, took a job at a local freight yard close to home, day shifts, short distances, familiar roads. Every winter, when the first real cold settles in and the snow starts to fall, I think of her. I think of the woman I didn't stop for. I think of the red coat standing where no one should be. And when I pass someone stranded on the roadside now, anyone, no matter how inconvenient the moment, I always stop, because I know what walks the roads when we don't, and because some deaths don't vanish in the snow.